CD 4.
Wow! Well done you, naughty Emily. I know you've been saying it for ages, but I think I finally see what you mean about her being insecure. It's just so sad. Yep, sad but true. Anyway, Dad was really supportive. He's even offered to sit and chip old mortar off the rocks. Golly, that's dedication for you. Yeah, I told him to be careful what he offers, Emily said with another laugh. Speaking of offers, she said, looking at her watch as they heard a number of vehicles drive in, didn't you offer to help me cook? We'd better get on with it. They were just delivering the morning tea when Des Oliphant drove in, waving and grinning at them from his open window. I don't believe it, Emily said, shaking her head and laughing. He turned up at the same time yesterday, just in time for the scones. Emily and Barbara enjoyed a cuppa and slice of Jubilee cake with the guys. They were expecting to finish just before 12, in time for Grant and Steve to get to their afternoon games of sport. Emily offered to pack up sandwiches for them to take, but they refused. She suspected a crispy meat pie with sauce or a hot dog might be their Saturday ritual. She invited Des to stay, but much to Emily's surprise, he announced he'd been called up last night to fill in on the local men's bowls team. But you've never even played bowls, Emily cried, aghast. Well, apparently I'm better than them forfeiting. And for all I know, once you hit 60, you might be automatically programmed to be able to play. I've just never tried, he added with a chuckle. Who knows, I might uncover a hidden talent, he said, miming an underarm throw. Chapter 14. The last few sheets of iron went up quickly, and then Emily, Barbara, Jake, and David were tucking into sandwiches after saying goodbye to the guys. Why don't we go for a drive this afternoon? Barbara said, to no one in particular. Maybe look at a couple of antiques and second-hand shops for furniture for Em's study. No thanks, David said. Oh, yes, please, Emily said, and clapped her hands together a couple of times. Jake? Sorry, David, he said, shooting David an apologetic glance. But count me in. Jake Lonergan, you are a disappointment to the Brotherhood. You don't have to come, Barbara told him. These guys could drive me home later, she said, putting a hand on his. That's okay. I know when I'm beaten, David said with a sigh. Anyway, it might be wise to have a less emotional participant. And I can keep hold of your spending, missy, he said, tapping Barbara gently on the end of her nose. Goody, it'll be fun, Barbara said, clapping her hands. I doubt it, David muttered. Come on, show me this freshly painted room. Barbara got up and collected her handbag from the floor beside Grace. I can't believe you didn't show me the other day. Too busy with the shed and cooking. Fancy a bit of antiquing, Gracie? Barbara asked the dog. The border collie cocked her head as if contemplating the question and then began flapping her tail against the floor. Great, even the dog's gagging up on me, David said. Thanks a lot, Gracie. I thought we were friends. Stop your whining, Emily said with a laugh, and threaded an arm through one of his. They all trooped down to her office and surveyed the room. Wow, I love the colour, Barbara said. It's very pink, said David. Isn't it great? Jake said. It's quite a masculine shade of pink. You're kidding, right? David looked incredulous. There ain't nothing masculine about that. What would I know? He conceded, throwing up his hands. You know lots, darling, just not about interior design, Barbara said, wrapping an arm around her husband. I'm keeping the bed. I'll decide what cover later. But I'm thinking of adding a desk and chair and an armchair and floor lamp. So that's our mission for today, Emily said, beaming at the others. What are you doing on the window? Barbara asked. I would love curtains and a Roman blind made in the same fabric as whatever armchair I find, but After our trip to Port Lincoln the other day, I now know that will cost an absolute fortune. I think I'll have to deal with window coverings later. It doesn't all have to match, it just has to tie in and tell a story. Isn't that what they say on all those TV shows? Barbara said. Just thinking about what would go with what makes my head spin, Emily said with a sigh. Best not to overthink it. Let's just go browsing and see what jumps out at you. Just pick pieces you love rather than trying to follow rules, Barbara added. You're probably right. Good advice, Jake said. I think that's how my sister Simone went about her decorating. She started with the big pieces first and worked everything else in around them. Emily told me how gorgeous her house is, Barbara said. It's such a pity she's not here to advise us. Right, so everyone take a mental picture of the room and keep that in mind while we're traipsing through the stores, Emily said. All I'm seeing is pink, and I think I'm scarred for life, David said with a laugh. Is it too pink? Seriously? Emily asked, looking from Barbara to Jake and back again. No way, I love it, Barbara said. I'm only messing with you, David said. I'm sure it's lovely, if you like that sort of thing, he added with a shrug. So not helpful, Emily said, laughing. They walked outside to where David's dual cab ute was parked. Perhaps I should drive, since I'm the only sane one, he said. And it sounds like we might need a ute for transport. They chatted the whole way to their first port of call, around 20 minutes away. The sign swinging from a pole outside read Antiques, but inside they only found flashy designer homewares, throw rugs, bedspreads, old-style French armchairs in beige fabric with grey cursive writing all over it. Not really what we're looking for, huh? Barbara said to Emily, as they all made their way across the car park. No. Bit of a nerve calling them antiques. Isn't that false advertising? Probably. Jake agreed. It's everywhere in Melbourne, this French provincial look, he said. I'm a bit sick of it. Can you believe they wanted $300 for that bird cage with the faded paint out the front? David said incredulously, shaking his head. Yep, said the others at the same time, and then laughed at their synchronicity. What would you do with it? Surely not use it for storing fancy cups and saucers like they were. They hardly need securing, David said. It's just decorative, Jake explained. David frowned. Barbara laughed and put her hand on David's shoulder. My darling, ever the practical one, she cooed. Right, Jake said, pulling his phone out of his pocket to check the directions. Oh, I think we've got time to get to one more. The closest one is further south, about another 20 minutes away. I hope it'll be worth it, David said as he slumped into the driver's seat. Should have brought something to read. Now this looks more promising, Jake declared. In front of them was a shed with undeniably genuine old wares spilling out of the wide open doors. Leaning up against the corrugated iron wall was a stack of wrought iron bed frames. Rickety-looking wooden chairs in all shapes and sizes, most with seats missing, were scattered about haphazardly. It was like going from one extreme to the other. This shop, if you could call it that, looked like it specialised in gathering its stock from the sides of roads on council clean-up day. If this was what people were using to decorate their homes with nowadays, Emily was way out of touch. It just looked like a lot of old junk. David parked and they crunched their way across the gravel towards the entrance. Perhaps all the nice stuff is tucked away in the back, Emily told herself, as she walked past the chairs and a collection of rusting watering cans. Hey, these would be great for the other project, Jake said, pointing to some timber fire surrounds on the other side of the doors. What other project? David asked. We're going to rebuild the cottage across from Em's, Jake explained. Except it won't really be a cottage, it'll be considerably bigger than it originally was. We just can't seem to stop calling it a cottage. To live in? David said. Maybe,
but most likely to be an art gallery,"
Emily said. "I thought you wanted to run a B&B, David said.
"Changed my mind. Woman's prerogative."
"Indeed. Well, I look forward to hearing all about it." Emily and Barbara left David and Jake to examine the fireplaces and stepped through the doors. Inside, the building was fully lined and painted. Apart from the ceiling, you wouldn't have known it was a shed. "Hi there," called a woman from behind a glass counter in one corner of the space. Emily glanced over and returned her greeting. Under the counter, the top shelf contained what looked like costume jewellery. On the bottom shelf, glassware was grouped in various shades. Now that she was looking more closely, Emily saw that everything in the shop was very carefully organised. "There are a few rooms," the woman explained. "Feel free to go right through. Is there anything in particular you're looking for?" "Just having a wander, really," Barbara said. "Although Emily here is looking for some office furniture." "Through to the back room and to your left," the lady said, smiling at Emily and indicating with her hand.
"Okay, thanks,"
Emily said. Whilst she was keen to see what office furniture was available, the main area was chock full of interesting stuff. In one corner was a range of vintage clothing, including a whole rack of fox furs in varying styles. Another corner contained shelves full of books. Emily had only got back into reading since leaving John. How good would it be not just to have somewhere special to read, but to dedicate a whole corner to floor-to-ceiling bookshelves? As if bringing her fantasy to life, there was a comfy-looking armchair and an old floor lamp already set up. The items weren't quite to her taste. She had in mind a classic wingback-style chair rather than one from the 1960s with curved wooden arms, but it gave her some great inspiration. In the other corner of this main shed there was a collection of old record players, gramophones, and large and small valve radios in gorgeous restored timber cases. How cool would one of those be? Emily walked to the back of the shed and through a small covered walkway into another space even larger than the previous one. She looked around, taking it all in. Again, the room was divided into 4 sections. To the left was an array of dining furniture and rows of chairs hanging on the wall right to the ceiling. Tables were stacked 3 high, and timber sideboards were lined up with space to walk between them. "How great is this shop?" Jake said, appearing beside her. "I love how organised everything is."
"I was just having that very same thought,"
Emily replied, smiling at him. She looked to her right. The corner contained living room furniture. Jacobean lounge suites with polished timber arms and cane sides were again carefully arranged next to more modern leather styles. A couple of tub-style chairs caught Emily's eye, but they seemed all to go with 3-seater couches, and there was no way she could fit that many pieces in the room. She slowly scanned past them to a selection of side and coffee tables and a collection of single chairs. Suddenly she gasped and her mouth fell open as she spotted a wingback chair upholstered with a large floral print in monotone dark green that could almost pass as black on cream. She'd had in her mind a stripe or check design, but this was even better. She rushed over to it. "Please be perfect, please be perfect." And it is, she thought, as she ran her eyes all over it. This was the chair for her and her office. "Wow, what a beauty," Jake said. Emily was slightly startled. She'd become so focused on the chair she'd almost forgotten she wasn't alone. She replied, as she stared at the chair and its price tag, hardly able to believe the bargain price of $500. The new ones she and Barbara had seen the other day in Port Lincoln started at $1,000, and that was with the cheapest, plainest fabric. She didn't know much about fabric quality, but this sure looked expensive and totally gorgeous. "And a bargain," Jake said, peering over her shoulder.
"It's great, isn't it?"
"I can attest to its comfort. It was one of mine." Emily turned at hearing the shopkeeper's voice. "I've spent many an hour curled up reading in it," the lady added. I had to downsize to go into business, so a few pieces had to go. The price you pay and all that, she said cheerfully with a little flourish of her hand.
Oh, right, fair enough,
Emily said, feeling a little awkward. What else was there to say? Did you see the back of the tag? There are matching curtains if you're interested. If not, I'll knock $100 off the price.
Oh, I wish I'd measured the window,
Emily said. If you've got an older house, they fit the standard single-sized double-hung window, if that's any help, the woman offered. That's exactly what sort of window you have, Jake said, as Emily thought the same thing. This is totally meant to be. She was so excited she felt like shouting from the rooftops. What have we found, kids? David asked jovially, wandering up with Barbara. Oh, it's perfect, Barbara cried.
And there are matching curtains that should fit my window,
Emily said. Well, quick, snap it up before I do, Barbara said. Don't you dare, she said to Barbara.
I'll take the chair and the curtains, thanks,
she said to the shopkeeper. Oh, I'm so pleased it's going to go to a nice home, the woman said, smiling warmly. Emily smiled back. Hey, this would be perfect for your cuppa and a book. Just the right size and height, I reckon, Barbara said, holding up a small, round occasional table in a medium-coloured polished timber. Go on, sit. Make sure it's comfy, she urged, putting it down beside the chair. Emily settled into the chair with a big grin. She reached over the side and pretended to pick up something from the table. Yes, definitely just the right height. It was big enough for a mug and book and maybe even a small vase of flowers. It's perfect. Lucky we brought the ute, David said. I'll get the curtains out for you to see. They're in great nick, but I'll let you be the judge. Jake, let's take the chair out the front, David said.
Thanks very much, you guys,
Emily said, and began making her way over to the back left of the shop where she could see modern Laminex office desks. Hopefully there were some pieces with character hidden behind. Well, this is clearly meant to be, Barbara said, joining her. I bet you'll find the perfect desk here too. Emily stopped at a stacked pair of pedestal-style desks next to another stacked pair of simple desks with turned legs and a single drawer. She looked from one style to the other, unable to decide which she preferred. These are nice, Barbara said. Which sort? Both, Barbara said with a laugh.
That's the problem I'm having.
What problem are you having? Jake asked, appearing beside them and draping an arm around Emily.
I can't decide which style I prefer. I'd like a few drawers to put stuff in, but I also like the turned legs and slightly more dainty look of these, she said, pointing. Take one of each, he said. She looked at him curiously. I don't have the space. Anyway, you can't have two desks in a room. That would look silly. No, not both for your office. One for your office and the other for a reception desk for the gallery. Isn't it a bit soon to be looking at gallery furniture? I don't think so. That's the thing about buying second-hand. It's not like ordering new from a catalogue. You might not find the right thing when you want it. He's got a point, Barbara said, nodding thoughtfully. Emily could see it too, but the conservative voice inside her was already saying it was pretty decadent to buy a chair and two desks. But the longer she stood there looking at the desks, the more she liked both styles equally. And Jake was right. She might never see anything in this condition again. She leaned closer to where white price tags dangled from handles, almost holding her breath. How much? Barbara asked. $750 each. Bargain! Jake and Barbara said at once. Maybe, but that would mean she was spending $2,000, not including the small side table. She'd never spent so much in one hit in her life. Well, except when buying her car, but that didn't count. Hey, Dave, can you give me a hand to take this one down so Em can get a better look? Jake said over his shoulder to David, who had wandered up to join the small group. No worries. Soon the two piles were split,
and there were 4 desks sitting on the floor. Emily's mind began to boggle. Before, she was struggling between the 2 styles, but now she liked all 4 desks. "Oh, God," she said, putting her hands to her head. "They're all nice." "Well, if it helps, these 2 are $9.50 each," David said with a shrug. Ordinarily, Emily would have gone with the cheaper, but things were different now she had some money. She'd never been one to splurge, but perhaps she deserved a lift in standards. And after all, an art gallery needed to make a good impression. Jake was inspecting each piece with a critical eye and running his hands over them. Emily stood nibbling her lip whilst trying to decide. "Aren't they great?" the shopwoman said, appearing again. "Yes, but I can't decide between them," Emily said. "I've got the decision down to 1 pedestal and 1 with turned legs, but that's as far as I've got," she added with a laugh. "Would a cuppa help with the thought process?" the woman asked kindly. "Do you run a cafe here as well?" Barbara asked, looking around. "No, but I've got a machine hiding out the back. I'm going to make myself a latte, but I can do a cappuccino, flat white or short black, or hot chocolate." "A latte would be great, thanks," David said. Hot chocolate would be lovely," Jake said. "Oh, yes, hot chocolate would be fabulous," Barbara said. "And for me too. Thank you so much. Maybe a sugar hit will help me make this decision," Emily said. "You know, you can always sleep on it for a few days," the woman offered. "If someone else is desperate for one, I could call you." "Wow, that's very generous, but I think I really should make a decision today." "Well, at least wait until after you've had a cuppa. It always helps me," the lady said, beaming, and left. "Isn't she nice?" Emily whispered. "Yes, lovely," Barbara agreed. "I wish more people in the city understood the value of good service," Jake said from almost out of view beside a desk. "Sorry, but I think you're definitely better off with the 2 more expensive desks. There is a bit of damage at the back of that one," he said, pointing to the cheaper of the pedestal desks. "Remember, in a gallery, people will be walking up to what is the back of it if you're sitting behind it," he added. "Good point," Emily said thoughtfully. "And the legs of that one are a bit sturdier, and the proportions seem better all round," he said. "Ultimately, it's your choice, though." "Okay, done. I'll take both the more expensive ones," Emily said, her mind suddenly clearing. What's a few $100s in the scheme of things? "And they are tax-deductible," Jake added. "Your drinks are ready," the lady called from the doorway a few moments later. They all made their way back through into the other shed and over to the counter, where 5 steaming mugs sat next to a sugar bowl, some teaspoons on a plate, and a plate of chocolate Tim Tam biscuits. Below the counter, 5 chairs were arranged in a semicircle. "Please help yourselves," the woman said, picking up a mug in one hand and Tim Tam in the other, and then sitting down. "I'll knock something off the price if you buy the chair and the 2 desks," she added cheerfully as she dunked a corner of the biscuit into her coffee. "I think I'll also take 4 of the timber mantelpieces," Emily said. "What do you say, Jake?" "Sounds like a good idea to me." "I could do a good deal on restoration too, if you'd like." "What do you think, Jake?" "We've got plenty of time until we need them. Why don't we take them now and then bring them back for restoration later if we decide not to do it ourselves?" he asked. "Fine with me, whatever you decide. Are you renovating a house?" "Building one, actually. I'm hoping to open an art gallery, but it's very early days. We're still in the planning phase," Emily said. "And I've never run a business before," she admitted. Nothing to it. I think a gallery is just what the district needs. You'll do great. And I'd love to come to the opening if you have one. I'm Maureen, by the way," she added, extending her hand. Emily introduced herself and then the others. Chapter 15. It seemed as if they'd been sitting there for only minutes chatting with Maureen. But when Emily noticed long shadows crossing in front of the open shed door, she was surprised to find it was 5:30.
"We'd better pack everything up and get going so you can close up,"
she said, standing, putting her mug on the counter and getting out her wallet. "Oh, don't worry about keeping me," Maureen said, getting up to attend to her. "All part of the job, and I've enjoyed the company."
"It's been lovely,"
Emily said, handing over her card.
"I hope you don't mind if I borrow your idea about serving coffee to customers,"
she said, while waiting for the transaction to go through. She could imagine visitors browsing her gallery with cup in hand or sitting and looking at art from strategically placed bench seats. Perhaps she could serve scones and jam and cream, too, so people could sample her jam. "Not at all. And feel free to pick my brains about anything. We small business owners have to stick together," Maureen said, smiling as she handed back Emily's card. "I'll just do up a receipt." "We'll start bringing everything out and loading the ute, right, Dave?" Jake said. "Absolutely," David said. "I'll get the little table," Barbara said, setting off after the two men. It was almost 6 by the time the 4 fireplace surrounds, 1 armchair and 2 desks were loaded and securely tied down. Maureen had lent them a couple of old woolen blankets for extra padding, which they promised to return in a few days. The small round side table was stowed between Barbara and Emily in the back seat, and they set off waving to Maureen, who was out the front of the shed bringing things in. They had offered to stay and help, but she'd insisted that she was fine, and that as she had a good system down pat, it was easier to do it on her own. They drove away chatting excitedly about meeting someone new and how lovely Maureen had been. She and her husband, who was in mining and spent 2 weeks at home and 2 weeks away, were ring-ins, people from outside the district. Barbara said with a laugh that it was lucky they had to return the blankets, because she'd been so caught up with Emily furnishing her office that she hadn't had a good look around for herself. "That was probably the plan all along," Jake said with a laugh. "Yeah, you return the blankets, buy something else, take the blankets again, have to go back again, etc., David said, chuckling. "Very clever."
"Can you believe she gave me 25% off everything?"
Emily said. "Really? That's very generous," Barbara said. David and Jake murmured their agreement. Despite the saving, Emily still felt a little queasy at how much she'd spent. "Oh well, too late now, as Gran would say."
"Golly, shopping is exhausting,"
Emily said, thinking aloud. But it was a satisfied exhaustion, she thought. Whoever said shopping was therapy was so right. "Imagine doing it all day, every day," Barbara said. "Don't you go getting any ideas, wife of mine," David warned, raising his eyebrows and locking eyes with Barbara in the rear vision mirror. "I think you're pretty safe, darling," she said, reaching forward and touching his shoulder. They lapsed into silence, a sure sign they were all tired. "Who's for tea at the Wattle Creek pub, then?" David said a few minutes later. He was approaching the intersection where the dirt road to the right was a shortcut through to Emily's. If they stayed on the bitumen, they'd end up in Wattle Creek. There was a chorus of yeses, and David sped the vehicle back up again.
"Oh, I wouldn't mind checking the mail,"
Emily said. She hadn't checked it for a couple of days. She usually did it when she went for groceries, but they'd got them in Hope Springs the other day. She thought again of how much she'd spent today. God, she was lucky to be in the financial position she was. Not so long ago, she was freaking out about relatively small expenses such as groceries and eating out. She absolutely did not want to live like that again. And thanks to John and his parents, she probably wouldn't have to. But she would have to keep an eye on her budget. Though the diamonds, a little voice in her head reminded her. No way, she counted. She'd sooner move back in with her parents than reveal their existence. Gran had kept them secret through all the financial ups and downs of her and Grandpa's lives, so Emily sure as hell wasn't going to fail her by parting with them. Not that she had any idea how one would go about putting rough diamonds up for sale, or even as collateral for that matter. She could imagine doing so, only to have the Australian Federal Police or FBI turning up and arresting her for having blood diamonds. Was that only in Africa or India as well? The little research she'd done online suggested that the diamond industry in Golconda was all but over. In her overactive imagination, she conjured up the relatives of the Indian prince. She imagined them turning up, declaring that the diamonds belonged to them and demanding their return. Then the media would get a sniff and life as she knew it would be over. Emily almost laughed out loud as she pictured Enid putting up a fight with the Indian contingent and claiming that she was the rightful owner. No doubt they'd take off in fright. Why had the Indian prince given Granny Rose the diamonds anyway? There was no evidence of romantic feelings in his letter, but Emily couldn't help wondering what had captured his heart enough to send her such a gift. For her wedding to another man. God, she hated not knowing, but had to accept that she never would. The story had died with Gran. Damn it. Of all the hours she'd spent with her over the years and all the anecdotes she'd listened to, why couldn't Gran have shared the most interesting one? Emily had heard all about her school days, how she'd met Grandpa, how her wealthy parents hadn't approved and had all but cut her off after her marriage. She'd even talked about how they'd sent her off on a world trip with her uncle, who was some sort of diplomat. But she'd never once mentioned the prince. He had to have existed for the diamonds to exist. And they did exist because she had them in the button jar and she had the letter. And there was no way her dear old Gran, the most honest person she'd ever known, was an international diamond thief. So why hadn't she ever told her? Why didn't you tell her you were so unhappy with John? Emily asked herself. But that was a totally different thing, she countered, and folded her arms tight across her chest with a harumph. Are you okay? Barbara asked. Yeah, just thinking, Emily replied. Your office is going to look fantastic, Barbara said. I'm looking forward to getting it all set up. I'm not sure how much use it'll get, though, she added with a laugh. Moments later, they were pulling up outside the Wattle Creek Hotel. I'll park out the front so we can keep an eye on the load, David said, putting on the handbrake and turning off the vehicle. Thanks, that'd be good, Emily said. Now, don't let me forget to check the mail on our way past later. Okay, Jake, David, and Barbara chorused. They went inside and ordered their meals at the counter. So, tell me more about Project Cottage Rebuild, David said when they were settled at a table. Jake explained that as well as being a gallery space for Emily, the new, larger version of the cottage would be an advertisement for his business. I'm hoping it'll be a win-win situation. So, if you're making it so much bigger, you're going to need more stone, right? Probably double what we have. Any idea where you're going to get it? I haven't got that far yet. I'm hoping one of the owners of the land with piles dotted about will let me have it for a good price. You shouldn't have to pay for it. Maybe you wouldn't, but I'm an out-of-towner, remember? Leave it to me. I know plenty of blokes who would love nothing more than to offload a pile of rock. Thanks. That would be brilliant. Hey, here's an idea. What if I help you clean your rocks and whatever else I can do while things are quiet for me? And then you do some hours on the tractor for me when the time comes. Oh, now there's a good idea. Are you sure? Of course. I wouldn't suggest it if I wasn't. You should be able to get away a bit when other trades are hard at work, right? Hopefully that will fit in with the break in the season. It's a deal, Jake said, holding out his hand for them to shake on the arrangement. The dining room was empty and their meals came quickly. With no home games that afternoon, those who had travelled for sport were still on their way back. Thankfully, they'd be out of the pub and on their way before the post-match crowds turned up. They were a rowdy mob whether they won or lost. They got drunk and boisterous, celebrating or commiserating. Emily quietly suspected that was why Saturday was schnitzel night at the pub. All those crumbs, chips and fat to soak up the alcohol. Not that she had any objection. She loved a beef schnitzel with mushroom sauce, and this evening's was no exception. God, that was good, Jake said, rubbing his stomach appreciatively as they left the hotel. "There's nothing like country pub fare," he added. Barbara, David, and Emily agreed. "Right, to the post office we go," David said, putting the ute in gear.
"Thanks,"
Emily said. David idled at the curb while Emily, with her 2 keys at the ready, one for John's box and one for the box she'd rented in her own name after leaving him, got out and bounded up the steps to the wall of numbered black doors. Barbara followed more slowly. Emily emptied both boxes and flicked through the few business-sized envelopes as she made her way back to the ute. While they waited for Barbara, she chose the only 2 letters that didn't appear to be from a local business or bank and that didn't appear to contain advertising material. The first was addressed to John. She carefully slid her nail under the seal, opened it, and drew out its contents. A cheque. Her heart raced a little, and she had to read the numbers twice. $57,000. It was the insurance payment for the totaled ute, and to go into the estate's coffers. She wondered briefly if anyone would object to her replacing the ute before probate was granted. The farm really did need one, didn't it? She stuffed it back in its envelope. The second envelope was addressed to her. In the top left corner was a return address, but no company name or logo. She frowned a little as she prized it open, and then carefully extracted the folded contents. Her eyes bugged as she realized it was John's life insurance payout. She stared at the numbers, trying to focus on more zeros than she'd ever seen in her life. She suddenly felt ashamed of all the gleefulness she'd felt lately at the prospect of the money turning up, and of the plans she'd started making for it when it did. There was nothing to celebrate about this moment. She'd been expecting a cheque, not as large as $500,000, but she hadn't expected to feel like this when it arrived. There was no sense of relief at her financial security now being assured. This was blood money. Maybe she should have been excited, but she just felt sad. And a little sick. "Are you okay?" David asked, turning in his seat to look at her. Emily nodded. Her chest felt too heavy to speak, but after 2 carefully taken breaths, she managed to.
"They're cheques. John's life insurance money and the payout from the ute."
"That's good," Jake said. "A bit more certainty." Barbara got back in the vehicle beside her.
"God, you look like you've seen a ghost,"
she said, looking at Emily. The second cheque was still in her hands in her lap. She held it out to Barbara.
"Oh. I feel terrible,"
Emily whispered, as tears threatened. Her heart thudded slowly and painfully. "That's quite understandable. It's a strange situation," Barbara said.
"But remember,"
she added with a whisper, putting her hand over Emily's.
"You deserve this. Be thankful, use it wisely, but do not feel guilty."
Emily nodded. "Okay, let's go. It's been a big day," David said, clearly at a loss for anything else to say. He started the vehicle. Emily wished she could have caught Jake's eye in the rear vision mirror, wished they could have shared a reassuring look. She felt a million miles away sitting in the back and desperately lonely, despite having her best friend right beside her squeezing her hand. An hour later they stood in Emily's office surveying the newly added pieces of furniture and curtains. They had left the second desk and mantelpieces out in the enclosed veranda so as not to clutter the room. "It's perfect," Barbara declared, clapping her hands. "Doesn't look nearly so pink now," David said dryly. "Well done," Jake said, wrapping his arms around Emily.
"Thanks so much for all your help,"
she said, looking around at everyone, forcing a smile. The room was just how she had imagined. But she couldn't muster much enthusiasm. The cheques had reminded her of the reason she was back here, John's death, and she wanted to be left alone for a while with her sadness. All you need now is some tall bookshelves wrapping around the corner to complete your reading nook, Jake said. And a floor lamp to read by, Barbara chimed in. Don't forget you'll also need a chair for your desk. Can't have you without the right ergonomics, David added. They all seemed to be making an effort to buoy her. She had to buck up. Barbara was right. No amount of moping would change the past. The thing was to look forward and make a new future with Jake. Chapter 16. The day Emily had been concerned about finally arrived. The next morning, Jake could barely muster the energy to turn over, let alone get out of bed. I don't know what's wrong with me. I thought I was doing well. She leaned over to reassure him. It's okay. You're meant to be resting. It's why you're here, remember? She was happy to take care of him, but privately she was worried about how ill he looked. Sweaty, shaky, his skin almost grey. I'm sure I'll be fine after some more rest, but you're right. I think I must have overdone things working on the shed. I feel terrible. Do you feel like eating? I was planning bacon and eggs. I can bring it in. You need to keep your strength up. That would be lovely, he said, smiling wanly. Sounds like it's going to be a perfect day for staying in bed, Emily added, as a shower of rain began pounding on the iron roof overhead. Jake was asleep when she returned with a tray of toast, bacon and eggs, some cutlery, a mug of tea, a glass of water, and his vitamins. She placed it down and went to get the second tray whilst debating whether to let Jake sleep or wake him. Thankfully, when she returned, he was sitting up, rubbing his eyes. How are you feeling? A little better. Hungry, actually. That's good. They sat up in bed side by side with their trays. Grace was nearby, looking like she was expecting to be tossed a morsel. You've already had some bacon, you greedy thing, Emily warned her. They never fed her from the table, but they rarely ate in bed, so she couldn't be blamed for begging. Outside, the weather turned into a raging storm. Emily opened the curtains so they could watch the dark sky being lit up by bolts of lightning that seemed just metres from the house. Later that morning they were still in bed, Emily reading and Jake dozing, when there was a knock on the door. Hey, Jake, are you there? It's David. Emily got up and opened the door with her robe on. Oh, sorry, I didn't realise you were— It's okay, she said. We've just been having a lie-in. Jake's not feeling so good. I wondered if you'd been overdoing it. So what brings you out on such a day? I've come to bring the sheep in and give them a good look over. It's clear up our way. It looked a bit dark down here, but I had no idea it was this bad. Though I think it's almost gone through. Do you want a cuppa while it clears? No, I won't bother you. I just wondered if Grace would like to come and play real farm dog, or at least spend some time with her mum. She'd love it. Did I tell you about the day Jake and I had a barbecue up on the rise? Grace went off and rounded up all the sheep while we weren't looking. She was ever so pleased with herself, weren't you, girl? Emily looked down at the dog, who was waving her tail back and forth. Sounds like she already knows what she's doing. She's certainly got the genes. Sasha is getting close to retirement. Would you mind if I used Grace to help her a bit? No problem. Actually, I have wondered whether she should be doing more of what she's bred for. She was so excited to be amongst sheep that day. After finishing with your sheep, I could take her for a few days and do some work with mine, if you like. Really put her to the test. And then maybe she might be up for helping out with shearing. Sasha is getting a little old for paddock work, and she struggles to get up onto the sheep's backs these days, poor thing. If Grace comes home with me, I can return her clean. She'll get pretty muddy out there today, he warned. And I promise I'll take very good care of her. Okay, all fine with me. I'm sure she'll love being a proper farm dog rather than a house layabout. Brilliant. Say hi to Jake. I won't bother you on my way out. I will. You have fun, Gracie. I'll miss you, she said, ruffling the dog's ears. And be careful. Don't worry. I know how much she means to you. What was that all about? Jake asked sleepily, hoisting himself up on his elbow.
David's come down to look over the sheep and thought Grace might enjoy some time out with her mum, she said, hanging up her robe and climbing back into bed. The sight of Jake's bare chest made her tummy flutter.
I wouldn't have minded going out with him. I'd like to see what goes on with sheep.
I'm sure there will be plenty of opportunities, but not today. You're staying right here with me.
All right. You're the boss,
he said wearily, and snuggled back down. Emily sighed at seeing his chest being covered up and picked up her book again. It was the first day they hadn't made love since he'd been there, but the day wasn't over yet. She forced her attention to rereading the line of her book for the third time. She was just drifting off when she felt Jake moving beside her. Her heart leapt with anticipation as he sidled up to her and began nuzzling her neck.
How interesting is that book?
He whispered, after running his tongue around her lobe in the way they had discovered drove her crazy. An exhilarating shudder ran the full length of her body. Not that interesting, she said with a seductive smile as she snapped the book shut and tossed it on the floor. That afternoon, Jake insisted he felt up to cooking an early dinner, since they hadn't bothered with lunch. They decided on lamb shanks for a quicker version of Sunday roast and opened a bottle of red wine while it cooked.
I feel so much better, Jake announced over dinner.
That's good. You look better. Are you still planning to go to Whyalla tomorrow? He'd mentioned an 11:30 a.m. meeting for the Civic Centre project. Emily had offered to share the driving. She didn't want him driving all that way and back alone, given he wasn't 100% well. She also had her own reasons. The office still needed a chair and a lamp. It would be good to go and do some browsing.
I'd better show up or else they'll think I've abandoned them.
The problem was that Emily also wanted to bank the insurance checks as soon as possible. She felt uneasy about having checks for such large amounts hanging about in her handbag. Unfortunately, Whyalla didn't have a branch of her bank. She also needed to do some washing. I can't really go if I'm to get the checks banked, she said.
Are you sure? I would actually feel better with a co-pilot, especially after today, he said. And I really should be at that meeting. If you got to the bank right at 9:30 when they open, you'd be back here by 10, leaving just enough time for me to make it to my meeting.
That might be cutting it a bit fine, Emily said. The drive to Whyalla would take 90 minutes, and she hated rushing of any sort, especially when Jake's professional standing relied on her getting back on time. And anyway, I need to do 2 loads of washing while the weather's fine. They're saying tomorrow is the only dry day for maybe the next week.
Jake said thoughtfully.
They were both silent for a few moments.
Right, Jake finally said. I think I have a solution. You give me the account details and I'll pop into town and bank the checks. You can do the washing while I'm away and then I'll pick you up. How would that work?
Perfect, she said, beaming at him.
It's probably high time I was seen in town. People will be starting to think I don't exist, he added with a chuckle.
We were in the pub the other night, remember? The whole town will know all about you by now. And what they won't know, they'll make up. Are you sure you're ready to start mixing with the wolves?
What, are you calling me a chicken?
Not at all, but don't say you weren't warned, Emily said, looking at him with a knowing expression.
Don't worry. I've lived in a small town before, remember?
They took the bottle of wine and went and sat on the concrete out under the veranda in the warm evening to watch the last of the lightning. So, how was the village? Emily asked when they turned onto the bitumen main road the next day. She'd stayed silent until now, to let Jake concentrate on navigating the dirt road that was still wet and slippery from the rain.
Good. Pity I was in such a hurry, though.
Really?
You're right about everyone knowing who I am. Well, that I'm your friend. Lots of people wanted to stop and chat. I caught up with Nathan, and he very briefly introduced me to Doris from Mitre 10. She seemed a good old stick, though I swear she was flirting with me. She's probably old enough to be my mother.
I don't mind as long as she gets us a good deal on our hardware.
Nathan apologised for not having had us over yet. He said that Sarah's doing training in Adelaide for the next couple of weeks and he's heading over to join her for the weekends. He asked me to tell you.
So you didn't get interrogated?
No. Everyone was very friendly. I can understand your concerns. You've lived here for ages and been on the wrong end of gossip, but everyone I came across was lovely. And I don't think you need to worry about them thinking you've moved on too quickly.
Oh? Why do you say that?
2 old ladies came up to me and one of them said they hoped I was sticking around because you deserved some happiness after, quote, what that brute of a husband put you through, end of quote.
Oh, wow. That's nice of them.
So maybe you've been judging the locals a little harshly.
Maybe.
She still remembered how it had felt to have people whispering about her. It's understandable. You went through a lot. Perhaps you just heard what you were expecting to hear.
I didn't imagine some of the things that were said to me, Jake.
No, but perhaps you interpreted what was said differently to what was intended. That's easily done when your nerves are frayed.
I didn't imagine Steve and Grant snubbing me in Mitre 10. They apologised for it the other day,
she said a little huffily, feeling the need to defend herself. Well, you can let it go now. It's in the past. David said you've got a lot of friends around here, Em, so try to focus on that. It'll sure help when you're trying to get a business up and running.
Emily felt a little stung, but she had too much respect for Jake to argue.
He was certainly right about one thing. She'd seen businesses rise and fall depending on how people viewed the owners. Maybe she had been a bit oversensitive. She'd been through a tough time, but that was behind her now. Onwards and upwards. She'd stop being so standoffish and get back to being how she'd been before leaving John. She used to love escaping the farm and heading into town. Even with just a few things on her list, her trips had the capacity to stretch into hours when people stopped her to chat. It was as if most people on the street didn't have to do anything by a certain time. And back then, she hadn't either. The town seemed to run at its own pace, sort of like what some people on holidays called island time. It was one of the things she'd always loved about Wattle Creek. That, and everyone waving and being friendly, even the policeman. By retreating from society and then keeping to herself, she could see that in a way she'd as good as snubbed the whole town, just like Steve and Grant had done to her. Yes, she had been hurting and embarrassed about people judging her, thanks to some sound conditioning by Enid, but she was free now, and happy, so blissfully happy with the man beside her. She looked across at him and smiled. He smiled back. What's that look for?
Just because I love you, and because you're so wise.
Right, he said a little quizzically. And I love you too. He patted her leg. I feel a little bad that I was in such a rush. Those 2 old dears in the bank clearly wanted to chat, but I had to be a little rude to get back home on time.
What happened?
They were asking where I was from, how long I was staying, and what I did in Melbourne. I'm trying to leave the building, shifting on my feet like I'm desperate for the loo or something, and they just kept firing questions at me.
So how did you escape?
I said I'd love to stay and chat, but was in rather a hurry and excused myself. I might have even agreed to go and have afternoon tea with them sometime, and to bring you. He winced. Oh.
Who were they?
I have no idea, Jake said with a laugh. One was on a walking frame and one had 2 walking sticks. They said they lived right across the road.
That would be the old Carrington sisters. John used to call them the Smiling Assassins. They're sweeties, but also the biggest gossips in town, even though they look like butter wouldn't melt in their mouths. But they'll be useful for getting the word out when the gallery is about to open. And they love nothing more than an outing. I can see we're going to have a big launch and invite the whole district.
Anyway, I hadn't been able to park right out front, so I was a couple of cars down. So there I was, striding down the street with two old ladies chasing me, and boy, you should have seen that frame and those walking sticks move, Jake said with a laugh. I practically leapt into the car and locked the doors. I half expected the one with the walking sticks to jump into the passenger's side or at least start banging on the window. It was a close call, I can tell you, he added, looking at Emily with wide eyes and a cheeky glint. Thank God you made it out in one piece. They chuckled for a few moments. So, I didn't expect to have to queue up in the bank. Don't they have the quick cheque deposit system in South Australia? Jake suddenly said. I couldn't find it anywhere. Emily laughed. Well, they do. In theory, it's hidden behind the pot plant in the corner. Oh, Jake said. Now, how would the gossip train be helped if people didn't have to go up to the counter? All sorts of dots are connected through the most idle, seemingly benign chatter. For instance, Emily continued, it is now officially confirmed that the handsome guy seen in town on Saturday night with Emily, Barbara and David is in fact living with Emily Oliphant because, 1, he was driving her car, and 2, he was doing her banking. And because you printed your name on the deposit slip, there's probably a whole gang of people around town typing your name into Google as we speak. Not to mention analysing your signature for indications of character flaws. Ha ha, too funny, Jake said. Believe me, the CIA is not a patch on Wattle Creek residents when they put their minds to it, Emily said. Chapter 17. An hour and a quarter later, the highway divided into 2 lanes each way to signal the outskirts of the city of Whyalla. They continued through to the city centre, Emily checking her watch repeatedly despite there being 10 minutes to spare. Jake found a park behind the Civic Centre, and they both got out and stretched their legs. Jake got his briefcase out of the boot, handed Emily the keys, pecked her on the cheek, and then bolted off for his meeting. Good luck, she called to his back before checking her watch again. Seeing that he would make it, she relaxed properly for the first time since he'd left for the bank that morning. As Jake disappeared, she realised she was standing in front of his project. True to what she knew of his work, there was a great melding of old and new going on. The only hints of a new build were the cathedral-style windows high up in the new section, and the brighter, cleaner mortar amongst the stonework. Everything this end of Whyalla tended to have a bit of a red tinge thanks to dust from the nearby steelworks. Standing before something that she knew to be Jake's work, Emily felt a surge of pride so strong she clasped her hands to her chest. She was a little overwhelmed at the thought that with all the awards and huge projects he'd excelled at, he'd chosen to stay in little old Wattle Creek and build something as modest as her cottage. When someone walked across the car park, called, "Hi!" and got into their car, Emily realised how silly she must look standing there gazing about. People were probably sitting inside their offices wondering what the hell she was doing. She walked out onto the street and looked around. She didn't know this older part of the city at all. Her previous trips to Whyalla were always centred around the large shopping centre to the west. There the streets were mainly lined with plain brick semi-detached houses dating back to the 1950s and 1960s. But here the buildings seemed to have more character. The 2-storey hotel on the corner especially was quite lovely. But she couldn't stand here all day admiring the view and looking lost. There was shopping to do. She'd printed a map she'd found online, but was now struggling to see which way she had to go to find the lighting shop. She turned it around in her hands, searching for a landmark, but the harder she looked and the more she concentrated, the more disoriented she got. Finally, she decided there looked to be more going on to her left. She'd wander in that direction and see what she found. She could have driven over to the shopping mall on the other side of town, but she was afraid she might not find the Civic Centre again. Anyway, she told herself, it might be nice to explore a different part of the city. Just a few hundred metres down the street, Emily came to a small cluster of shops. She almost let out a whoop of joy at the sight of a window jam-packed with lights in all different sizes, styles and colours. There was also a variety of desk lamps and floor lamps on display. Everything seemed so modern, though, and she was after something more classic in design. She took a deep breath, mentally crossed her fingers,
and pushed the heavy glass door open. A woman of about Emily's age greeted her from behind a large counter. "Is there something specific I can help you with, or are you just browsing?" she asked in a friendly tone. "A bit of both, actually," Emily said with a light laugh. "I'm looking for a floor lamp, but a bit more old world in style than what you have in the window. I'm not sure exactly what I want, just that I don't want anything in chrome," she added apologetically. "Well, that's a good start. Come with me. I have a feeling you might find just what you're looking for out the back," the lady said, getting up. As she stood, Emily noticed the name Karen on her name tag. Emily followed her down a short hall that opened into a room that was possibly even larger than where they'd come from. Emily's mouth dropped open slightly as she took in the display of older-style desk lamps and floor lamps. Above their heads, dozens of magnificent chandeliers, pendants, and glass light shades hung from the ceiling. "Wow," she said, looking around her. "Thanks," Karen said jovially. "I'll take that as a compliment. I love the older styles." "I'm struggling to take it all in, to be honest," Emily said, frowning. "You said you wanted a floor lamp," Karen said. "Do you want to create mood lighting in a corner or have it over an armchair to read by?" "Both," Emily said. "I'm putting a reading corner in my study." "Sounds lovely," Karen said, as she made her way over to the far left corner where there were tall lamps lined up. As Emily followed her, she began to see the method to the layout, which at first glance had just looked like everything in together. But now she could see banker-style desk lamps and an assortment of small, delicate lamps displayed on white melamine cubes of different heights in another corner. She turned her attention first to the floor lamps. Some were just tall, straight sticks, with shades and without, and some had hooks that the shades hung from. On a shelf, rows of glass shades were arranged by colour. There was also a selection of ruched and plain shades in all sorts of fabrics. They were all gorgeous. How was she going to choose? "Would you like me to leave you alone to have a good look, or would you like some help?" Karen asked. "Oh, I would definitely like some help, please," Emily said. Karen beamed. "Great," she said, putting her hands together. "What colours do you have in your furniture and paintwork? That's usually a good place to start. It's often easier to begin by eliminating anything you don't like at all and any colours that won't work," she explained. "I've got some photos on my phone," Emily said, fossicking in her handbag. She brought up the first of the photos she'd taken and leaned towards Karen to show her. "Oh, it's gorgeous," Karen said. "That chair is divine. And is that carpet original? It looks like 1950s or roundabouts." "I think so." "I love it." "Thanks." "Now, I'm sure I have the perfect lamp here. Just give me a sec to think it through," Karen said, putting a finger to her lip and tapping thoughtfully. After a few moments, she silently grasped the base of a tall lamp and set it in an empty space. "I think you'd be better with this style. That one, as lovely as it is," she said, pointing to another, "won't be high enough. And the gooseneck style might take up too much space. I'm guessing you don't have a huge area to work with?" "It is a decent-sized room," Emily said. "But as you can see, it's also got a bed and desk and chair in it. And I'm hoping to put high bookshelves in when I find some I like." "The bed is just across from your reading corner, isn't it?" "Yes." "Well, I think this would be perfect," Karen declared with her hand around the slender brass stem. "The base comes in a few different colours and finishes. This is solid brass, but it's lacquered over, so you'll never need to polish it," she added. That had been a question on the tip of Emily's tongue. She ran her hand up the base, which had some engraved swirling detail. "They're really well made. The base is nice and heavy, so you won't have a problem with it toppling over, no matter what shade you put on," Karen explained. "It also comes in a simple fluted design, which I can show you in the catalogue. But I personally like this one for a more feminine room. The fluted one is a bit heavier set and tends to be more masculine looking." "Okay, I like it," Emily said. "What sort of shade would you suggest?" "Can I take another look at your colours again?" Karen asked. Emily found the photos again and handed the phone over. While Karen studied them, Emily took in the range on the shelves above them. "I think you'd be best off with a glass shade. They give a gorgeous ambient glow as well as the targeted light for reading. Okay, Emily said, nodding. You'd think the obvious choice is pink, which it would be if you want the lamp to blend in, but if you want it to be a bit of a feature, I'd be inclined to go with green. It would tie in very nicely with the carpet and the chair. Of course, it's entirely up to you. I'm not sure, Emily said, frowning. I did have my mind set on pink, but that might just be because it seems the obvious choice, she hastened to add. I'm sure you've got a much better eye than me. Well, I have put together quite a few lamps over the years. Sometimes it's what you almost dismiss that turns out to be the perfect choice. Anyway, if you take something and then get it home and don't like it, you can always bring it back and change it, Karen said with a warm smile. Oh, that's great, but I live near Wattle Creek. That's no problem. I've got plenty of customers from over your way. I'm forever popping things on the bus or in the post, Karen said with a dismissive wave of her hand. How about I set up one with the green and one with the pink shade? They take on a totally different look when they're on, she offered, already starting to take the navy blue shade off another lamp in the same style. Emily looked back and forth between the two lamps and then closed her eyes to imagine each lamp in her setting. After a few moments, she opened them and looked at Karen. You're right. Definitely the green one, she said with a decisive nod. I think so. But seriously, you are allowed to change your mind, Karen said. How much is it? Emily asked tentatively. She felt terrible asking, given how helpful Karen had been. If only she could just say, I'll take it without even asking, but that just wasn't in her nature. It's very reasonable, Karen said. All up, $275. Oh, that is reasonable, Emily said, her surprise evident. She'd seen some lamps in Port Lincoln at nearly double the price and not nearly as nice. Next, they looked at practical desk lamps. They were all much the same design, but in a range of colours, none of which Emily was really taken with. There's one in antique brass that should be in a box that came in this morning, but I haven't had a chance to unpack it yet. Bear with me, and I'll get it out. If you're in a hurry and have other shopping to do, I can call you when I'm done, if you like, Karen offered. That's okay, I'm happy to wait. Don't rush, I'll just have a bit of a wander around, she said, making her way to the far side of the room where a selection of crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Hanging right above her was just what she had in mind for the gallery's entrance hall. She held her breath as she turned the price tag over. $2,000. Wow. Her eyes bugged slightly. It's genuine Italian crystal, Karen called out from her spot nearby on the floor surrounded by boxes and bubble wrap. It's beautiful, Emily said. I'll turn it on when I finish here. It's really quite spectacular. The genuine crystal makes a huge difference. I'll be there in a sec. Please don't hurry, I've got plenty of time, Emily said, and then checked her watch to make sure. She was surprised to find she had already passed an hour in this shop. Right, here it is, Karen declared. What do you think? She asked, putting a brass version alongside the other coloured desk lamps. Emily went over. She closed her eyes briefly and tried to picture it on her desk. It was traditional enough to blend in, and with the two joints on its arm, practical too. By attaching it to the lip of her desk, she wouldn't lose valuable working space. Once she put a stack of document trays, a computer monitor, a pen holder, a mug of tea, and perhaps even a laptop, she might be struggling for somewhere to work. Perfect, she said. I'll take it. And without even asking the price. It's $90. Fine. Now let me show you how gorgeous that chandelier really is, Karen said, going over to a bank of light switches on the far wall. There you go, she said, as the chandelier suddenly lit up. Oh, wow, Emily said breathily. She stood back for a better look and put her hands to her face. It was truly breathtaking. In a hallway as a feature without the distraction of all the other lights in the shop, it certainly would make a statement. Just the sort of classy impression needed for the entrance of a successful art gallery, she thought. I've got one at home. I couldn't resist after putting it on display. I'm in an old house, but it would work equally well in an old or new space, Karen said. Are you thinking for a hallway or somewhere else? It's a bit soon, but I'm planning to rebuild a stone building on my farm and turn it into an art gallery. My architect builder thinks downlights in the ceiling would be best for my rooms. I've agreed, but only if I can have a nice big chandelier in the hall. Sounds perfect. Downlights can take a bit of getting used to, especially if you generally like old-style things, but they are great for providing a well-lit space relatively energy efficiently and with less shadowing. And with most of them you can change the direction of the light, which is perfect for a gallery space. When is it opening? I'd love to see it. We're a way off yet, still in the planning stage, Emily said apologetically. If you have a launch, please send me an invite. I love art exhibitions and, as I'm sure you're aware, the peninsula doesn't have a lot on offer. Perhaps we can stock each other's brochures since we won't be in competition. Here, take one of my cards and do keep in touch. I'm Karen. Okay, great. I'm Emily. I'm afraid I don't have a business card yet. She'd travel that far for an art exhibition opening? Wow, that's keen. Her mind began trying to work out how far people would travel. Simone would be sure to come from Melbourne if she was exhibiting, but would any of Jake's friends travel that far? And what a great idea to swap brochures. That would really help each other broaden their customer reach. She'd mention it to Maureen at the antique shop too. I'll do you a good deal on the chandelier since you're buying so much. And perhaps we can help with the downlights and anything else electrical when you start building. I'd appreciate the opportunity to quote. We've got a shed full of trade supplies out the back, Karen said, distracting Emily from her thoughts. Emily stared up at the chandelier. Part of her wanted to say, I'll take it, but her cautious side held her back. She didn't want to get too far ahead of herself. She already had a desk and 4 mantelpieces for the gallery taking up space and not being used. As I said, we're a bit far off yet, Emily said heavily. Perhaps in a few months if it's still here? She thought about what Jake had said about snapping up antiques on the spot. No worries. I can always keep at least one of these in stock, and I can order more. As gorgeous as they are, they're not one-offs, but they come from Italy, so they do take a little while to arrive, Karen warned. Oh, that's great, Emily said, sighing with relief. I think I'm spending enough for one day, she said, smiling warmly at Karen. Suddenly the noise from the cars passing outside in the street became louder as the main door of the shop opened. Emily turned to see a tall, lean man in his late 30s or early 40s with blondish grey hair walk in, followed by, Jake, what are you doing here? She cried. Here she is, Jake said jovially, coming over and wrapping his arms around Emily. Em, this is Tom Green, my mate I've been telling you about. Our meeting finished early. Emily shook hands with Tom and said hello. I hear you're going into business together. You're in great hands. Emily nodded and smiled at Tom and then Jake. I think so. Hey, Karen, Tom said, bending and giving Karen a peck on the cheek. Don't tell me it's like Wattle Creek where everyone knows everyone. This is a proper city, for goodness sake. Karen's my sister, Tom said, smiling at the look on Emily's face. Of course she is. She almost laughed out loud. Just like Wattle Creek and Hope Springs, every second person is related. Too funny. How did you find me? Emily said, after introducing Jake and Karen. By accident, really. The car was still in its spot, so I figured you couldn't be too far away. There aren't many shops. Tom here is relieving Karen for her lunch break, so I thought I'd tag along and see if I bumped into you before phoning. And here you are, he added, kissing her and draping an arm around her shoulder. So, find anything nice? Emily grinned and pointed at the chandelier above them. Wow, Jake said. Bit soon for that, isn't it? He teased good-naturedly. That's what I was just saying to Karen, Emily said. But I have found the perfect floor lamp, desk lamp, and light shade for my office, she said triumphantly. Great, show me, Jake said. That desk lamp, Emily said, indicating her selection sitting on the counter, and everything else is out the back."
Emily led them through to the next room.
"The green one,"
she said proudly, pointing to the floor lamp.
"and that schoolhouse light shade for the main bulb,"
she said, pointing to the shade on the small desk.
"All on Karen's recommendation. Lovely, huh?"
"Perfect," Jake said. "Looks like I've come at just the right time to be packhorse," he added with a laugh.
"Yes, now all I need is a chair. If only you sold office furniture." "I'm afraid not, but you'll find a great selection 2 shops further along," Karen said.
"Don't tell me run by your cousin Alfred. I'm not going to ask."
"Tell Paul I sent you, and he'll give you a good deal."
"No, you're not going to ask," Emily told herself sternly. "He's our cousin," Tom said. She had to work very hard not to laugh. "Do you own the whole city?" Jake asked with a chuckle. "Alas, no, but our grandparents were in shoes and haberdashery many moons ago," Tom explained. "We seem to have inherited business brains from them."
"Do you mind if I head off for my lunch break? I'm meeting up with a friend," Karen said suddenly.
"Sure, no problem."
"And can you fix Emily up and pack the lamps for her?" she added.
"Yep, that's fine. You go," Tom said to Karen. As she left, he turned back to Emily and Jake. "Why don't you guys go and look at chairs while I pack everything up for you?"
"Okay, thanks. We'll be back soon," Emily said, and linked her arm through Jake's. "So, how was your meeting?" she asked when they were outside on the footpath.
"Good. Everything's ticking along nicely. They've got a great project manager and team of builders and won't need me as much as I thought they would. A bit ironic given I'm only down at Wattle Creek now and not having to come all the way from Melbourne. Oh, well, as long as they have someone else to blame things on if it all goes pear-shaped," he said cheerfully, shrugging.
"Is that likely?"
"There's always the chance of a problem arising. But at the moment it's all coming along beautifully. Bit of a waste me being here, really. But at least their lunch was good. And you found your lights. That's good. Have you eaten?"
"No, I've been in choosing lights this whole time."
"You must be starving." "It's after 1. Let's find you something to eat. We can do the chair after that."
Emily smiled, enjoying Jake taking charge. It really was rather nice having someone to rely on.
This is the end of CD 4. The book continues on CD 5. CD 5.
Chapter 18. Jake pointed the car towards the highway. After buying a pair of office chairs and collecting her purchases from the lighting shop, Emily had asked him if there was anything else he wanted to do. But he was as keen as her to head home.
"So, Tom seems nice," she said, looking across at Jake as the built-up area came to an end and the grey bitumen stretched ahead through red dirt dotted with low-growing grey-green saltbush and sparsely occurring taller native trees and shrubs. Emily had never liked this drive. She always found it desolate and quite depressing.
"Yeah, and I found out some very interesting information that will help us with our project," he said conspiratorially.
"Oh, like what?"
"Like that the Wattle Creek Council use either the building inspector from Port Lincoln or the one in Whyalla, taking turns."
"And don't tell me Tom is the building inspector at Whyalla?"
"Yep," Jake said, nodding.
"Wouldn't that be illegal or at least a conflict of interest?" she said.
"Not really. He doesn't get the whole say, just makes recommendations for the council to rule on. And anyway, it would be a 50-50 chance of him ending up looking at our application. But he did say that Wattle Creek are pretty easy to deal with. Basically, as long as the building meets the regulations, they're not all that fussed what you put up out on a farm. Though he did advise that applying for it as a house rather than a commercial space would mean less red tape. We'll be meeting all the regulations for disabled access anyway, but Tom said the process would be a lot slower if you go down that path. And he's absolutely right. I've done plenty of commercial spaces. The more regulations involved, the worse it gets. Well, we are building a dwelling, first and foremost. It needs to be versatile if the gallery doesn't work out for any reason. So it's not as if we're being dishonest, Emily said. Exactly.
What else did he have to say?
The next council meeting is Wednesday week. If we get the plans in by then, we might get it through this month. Otherwise, we'll have to wait until the next one. Not that it'll really matter. We've got plenty to keep us occupied, sorting the stone and cleaning it. Emily agreed. Thinking about what had to be done to turn the pile of rubble back into a building, and one double the size, was really quite daunting. Which reminds me, David rang just as I was coming out of the meeting. He's sourced the extra stone.
That's good,
she said. Except for the fact that it's only available because an unsentimental person has torn down another quaint old building, Jake said with a grimace. Still, it's good that we'll be able to give it a new life. All in all, it's been a very productive day for both of us, he said brightly.
Yes,
Emily replied. She was exhausted, and the afternoon sun streaming in through the car windows didn't help. She closed her eyes and pictured the chandelier hanging in the hall. It would be perfect. Absolutely stunning. Emily woke with a start as the gentle vibrations below her changed to a shudder, and then gravel began spraying the underneath of the car. "Hello, sleepyhead," Jake said, smiling at her and patting her leg. She looked around. They were nearly home. So much for keeping you company while you're driving," Emily said wryly.
Sorry.
"You were dead to the world. I can only ever doze in a car. I never go fully to sleep," he said in awe.
Must have been all that shopping. I'm totally worn out.
Yeah, all that brain power used for making decisions. Emily felt dishevelled. She'd been in a deep dream. That dream, the one she'd had a number of times before. She looked out the window and frowned as she tried to recall the details. She'd been wearing tailored black pants and a formal wraparound silk shirt, the exact colour of her unusual grey and navy blue eyes. A photographer had been bouncing back and forth, making exaggerated gestures with his hands, while she posed against a mantelpiece with a large mirror framed in gold above it. Jake was beside her in a charcoal grey suit. It was a very formal do, and an evening one by the looks of their attire. They were leaning in towards each other, his arm around her waist, her elbow casually placed on the mantel. Between them sat her grand's button jar. They'd just finished the photo shoot when a car pulled up outside. The photographer scurried off to capture the event on film, and that's when she'd woken up. As she stared out the car window, Emily felt calm and content that Jake had been so prominent in her dream. She took it as a good omen. When she'd had the dream before, it had never been clear who the man beside her was. Previously, she'd always thought the house was the one she'd been renting from the Bakers. This time it had definitely been the cottage. Well, she supposed it must be, on account of the chandelier in the hall. What was the event? The grand opening? She hoped it was a sign this was all meant to be. But really, it could have been any building anywhere. Maybe it wasn't a gallery opening at all, but an engagement party or a wedding. Emily frowned, trying to take her mind back to the image of them beside the fireplace. Did she have a ring on her left hand? Was that why she had her elbow on the mantelpiece? If so, why then include the button jar in the shot? Oh, for goodness sake. It was only a dream. They're not meant to make sense. Really, the dream was just a montage of all the topics currently on her mind. Shopping for lights, indecision over the chandelier, Jake's presence in her life, the cottage project. You okay? Jake sounded concerned. He gently squeezed her leg. She reluctantly let the questions go and turned to look at him. Yeah, I was just thinking about a dream.
I've had versions of it a few times now. It's some sort of formal function. The last couple of times I was sure we were at the other house, but this time it wasn't.
Well, that must be a good omen. And we? Even better if I'm with you, he added, sounding genuinely pleased.
Do you think dreams foretell good and bad?
God, they've been asking that question since the dawn of time. No idea. I personally take them with a pinch of salt, Jake said. Emily smiled at hearing yet another of Gran's sayings. She wondered with idle amusement if everything Gran had said over the years was just a series of well-worn quotes, clichés, and hackneyed old sayings. It was like she'd searched Google, except of course Gran had never been near a computer. The thought of her almost 90-year-old granny trying to figure out how to turn on a computer, let alone punching requests into a search engine, struck Emily as hugely funny, and she unsuccessfully tried to stifle a giggle. What's so funny? Jake asked.
Nothing really. I was just thinking about Gran and her use of sayings. I must be so tired I'm getting delirious. You were saying you take dreams with a pinch of salt, she urged.
I think they're just the brain's way of expressing what we're thinking about, really, he said with a shrug.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Hey, don't read too much into it, whatever you think you saw. The project is going ahead, it's going to work out well, you're going to set up a successful gallery, and we're going to live happily ever after. I'm not saying life won't have its challenges, but we make a great team, Em. We communicate well, and with good communication you can solve most things. Though when kids come along, it'll change things somewhat. He stopped his ramble abruptly. Kids? Again? Emily tried not to look shocked, which was exactly how she felt. They'd agreed to take their relationship nice and steady. What had changed? She thought she wanted kids one day, but certainly not right now. Pregnancy and childbirth sounded hideous. She'd never spent any time around pregnant women or small children, never even held a baby. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. I didn't mean to put pressure on you. We did agree to take it easy, Jake said. Emily looked across at him. But there's clearly a but coming. But I love you, Emily. I'd love nothing more than to spend the rest of my life with you, for better or worse. Emily wondered if the strange light feeling she was experiencing was the blood literally draining from her face. He's not proposing, is he? So what if he is? She thought, surprising herself with how she actually felt. The blood started to rise again and her face blushed pink. Her heart rate increased. Are you proposing to me, Jake? She asked, and held her breath. Jake hesitated for just a second. I guess I am. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to do it like this. He kept looking between her and the road ahead. But I mean it when I say I love you and want to spend the rest of my life with you. We can work out all the details later. Emily stared across at him. She reckoned he was more flushed than her. Suddenly the car came to a stop right in the middle of the dirt road. Jake yanked on the handbrake, then turned and looked into her eyes. Hell, Em, marry me, he cried. Really? Yes, really. Please, as unromantic as my proposal is. Emily looked around, almost laughed. They were on an unsealed road surrounded by cleared farmland, practically nothing. As she tried to commit the scene to memory, she wondered what constituted romantic anyway. It was so subjective. What really mattered was that they got on well, were kind to each other, and agreed on the big, important things. But most importantly, she couldn't imagine a life without him in it, couldn't imagine not having his towel hanging beside hers in the bathroom, his toothbrush snuggled up to hers, her snuggled up next to him. She loved him and he loved her, and of course she'd marry him. Yes, of course I'll marry you. Please say yes, Jake implored.
Emily nodded and swallowed. He was still waiting for an answer, and now her mouth was too dry. "Yes," she eventually croaked amidst another nod. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, yes, yes." Jake undid his seatbelt and reached across, gathering her to him as much as the sides of the bucket seats and her seatbelt would allow. "Thank you. We're going to have a great life together, and I will absolutely make up for this crappy proposal. I promise," he muttered into her hair. Emily clung to him, trying to keep the tears at bay. Her heart surged and her soul glowed. It had come out of nowhere like a twister, but in a split second her life had changed forever. For the better. Wow. What a day. Could she get any luckier? They were both silent for a few moments. The word wow kept repeating itself in Emily's head. She felt like she was floating. "So, I suppose we'd better phone your parents and let them know," Jake said thoughtfully. "Oh, God," Emily said, crashing back down to earth. "No, you ring Simone first. I'm not ready to have my mother fluttering around choosing meringue dresses and 3-tiered cakes just yet. Once you open that door, there'll be no closing it," she added, rolling her eyes at him and sighing. "We could always elope," Jake suggested. "Like to where?" "How about India? We could go and see where your grand's diamonds came from." "Oh, well, I suppose we could," Emily said doubtfully. Though it would save her having to go through the palaver of another wedding. But what if they got there and the royal family somehow found out that she had the diamonds? What if the prince had had no right to give them away in the first place? And what if the area was so poor they couldn't afford to feed or educate their children? She'd feel compelled to help by selling the diamonds and setting up a school or something, and she really couldn't bear to part with Grand's treasure. Anyway, wasn't India full of open sewers, filthy streets, water you couldn't bathe in, let alone drink, without getting sick? Now her imagination was running away with her. If only she could just forget the diamonds. There was no way she was going to India. As exotic as it sounded, Emily wasn't ready for her first overseas trip to be somewhere quite so foreign. "I've always liked the idea of going to Tasmania," she offered. "Not very exotic, and India might give you some closure," Jake said. "I've got all the closure I need, thanks," Emily thought, but stayed silent. Perhaps she was just being a scaredy cat. Perhaps it would be nice to see where Gran might have met the prince, and she would have Jake to look after her. "Well, there's no rush. There are plenty of wonderful places to go. We'll find somewhere nice," Jake said. Emily was incredibly relieved and grateful that he had picked up on her reluctance. "Actually, what do you say we keep this to ourselves until we get a ring?" he continued, putting the car back into gear and moving off again. "Oh, okay, probably a good idea." The fewer difficult conversations with Enid, the better. They turned into the house yard and pulled up beside the gate to unload the car. The matter of their sudden engagement was set aside as they took the day's purchases in and set them up. Chapter 19. The following morning they were enjoying a cuddle when they heard the double honk of a truck air horn. "Jesus, he's early. What time is it?" Jake said, getting out of bed slowly. 7:30? Who is it?" "David's mate with more stone for us." Emily admired his back as he pulled his jeans on. As he fished around for a t-shirt, she got up and started getting dressed. "Don't you rush, but I'd better just go and make sure he doesn't put it in the wrong spot." Jake left the house at a jog. As she made her way outside a few minutes later, Emily noted how much she missed having Grace trotting along beside her. The little dog was still staying with David and Barbara. She raised her hand in greeting to the truck driver, who waved in return as he drove back out of the paddock and onto the road. She hadn't recognized him. Whoever he is, he was quick.
She continued over to where Jake was standing beside a fresh pile of limestone. "Looks like a perfect match." He held a rock in each hand. "See?" he said, smiling and holding them out for her to examine. "I'll take your word for it. They just look like rocks to me," she said with a laugh. "Well, they are, but they're lovely rocks except for the mortar still on them. But by the looks of what's already come off, it won't be too big a job to clean them." Emily looked around. She had been looking forward to sitting there knocking off the old concrete and mortar like Jake had explained the other day. But now, with a second pile that looked even bigger than the debris of the original building, the task looked huge. "So where do we start?" she asked. "Well, you're not starting anything without gloves," Jake said, in a kindly tone. "Your lovely hands will be torn apart in seconds. We'll have breakfast, bring the tools over, and then I'll show you what we have to do. And remember, if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. It's hard work, Em," he warned. "I'm willing to give it a shot," she said. They walked back to the house. "Actually, I do need to get a few things from the hardware store," Jake remembered. "Do you want to come and look at utes since you have your insurance money in, or stay here?" "Oh, well, I was going to wait until the check clears." "It can't hurt to look. With a brand new one, you might have to wait a while for it to come in." Good point. All right then, let's go look at utes," Emily said, with all the enthusiasm of someone heading off to visit the dentist. "Come on, it's exciting." "We'll have to agree to disagree on that." She laughed and tucked her arm through his. It all happened in a bit of a blur, but 3 hours later, Emily was driving her car out of town, followed by Jake behind the wheel of a shiny, new, bright blue Ford twin-cab 4-wheel drive ute. She'd wanted to wait a few days until her funds cleared, but the dealership's chief salesman had insisted on doing all the paperwork then and there. "I know where you live, remember?" he said with a wink as he handed her the keys. And it wasn't like she was leaving the district. If she wanted to purchase anything in town again, like for instance food, she'd pay. Very few people could get away with running up debts around town. Farmers were a little different. They tended to run accounts because of the irregularity of their income. But Emily would die with shame if she couldn't pay a bill on time. She had encouraged Jake to drive the vehicle home, since he was the one who was really excited about it. He'd jumped at the chance. While she was proud of her driving ability and blemish-free record, she hadn't liked the prospect of taking the narrow driveway out of the showroom in front of the staff and other customers. The ute seemed huge and had a lot less visibility around it than her car. She'd get used to it on her own property away from prying eyes, thank you very much. Jake hadn't needed much encouragement to do the test drive on her behalf either. As she drove the familiar road, she studied the ute in her rear vision mirror. It was a lovely sky blue. Oh, and it had 4 cup holders, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. She felt good about having the purchase ticked off the to-do list. It had been a good morning all round. On their way into town, they'd found a red parcel to collect ticket in the mailbox. At the post office, Bernice handed them a large tube over the counter. The plans. They'd been so excited that they'd foregone their trip to the hardware store in favour of rushing back home to examine them. If all was well, they'd have to make a trip back in to submit the plans to council. Bit of a waste, but they decided that unrolling the plans in private was preferable to doing it in the pub or in the community library or somewhere else in the public eye. They needed to look them over carefully, which meant being calm and focused. Jake had done a great job with the plans for the other house, but errors could always happen. It's really happening, Emily thought. Fingers crossed the plans go through council first go. Surely it was meant to be. If it wasn't, she wouldn't have been able to afford it when the budget was done. It was time for her to take a risk. She had plenty of money in the bank. The worst that could happen was that her business didn't succeed, and in a few years she might have to start looking again for a part-time job. It will all figure itself out, she told herself firmly. If this isn't meant to be, it won't be.
and no amount of worrying will change that. It was a mantra she'd made up. She just had to walk the walk. If she was meant to have a job in town, then she would have found one back when she was so desperate, wouldn't she? Maybe everything was as connected as Barbara kept telling her it was. If John hadn't shot at Grace, she wouldn't have left him, wouldn't have met Jake. If John hadn't died, she wouldn't have inherited everything, wouldn't be back in the house, and Jake wouldn't be back with her. Sometimes thinking about it all made Emily's brain ache. It was all terribly confusing. Which, Barbara said, was why she shouldn't worry, but just accept that there was a whole lot going on out there beyond her control. Emily really struggled with this concept of going with the flow, but she was trying. It helped having someone as calm and sensible as Jake to lean on. They unrolled the plans and went over them carefully. Then they pored over page after page of fixtures, fittings, materials, and hours with totals and subtotals beside them. As always, when numbers were involved, Emily cursed not inheriting Gran's mathematical mind. The old lady could do almost any calculation as long as she had a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. Half the time, Emily couldn't even do on a calculator what Gran could do in her head, and she'd tried many times. Numbers tended to just swim in front of her eyes. Thankfully, the computer program had done all their calculations. Emily stared at the big number at the bottom. The total estimated cost of building and fitting out the cottage, excluding non-fixtures like window coverings and furniture. It seemed a staggering amount of money. But as Jake reminded her, it wouldn't all be in one hit. There was a schedule of progress payments which made it all less daunting, and meant she could put some money away and not have such a ridiculous amount in an Access account earning nothing. "Now," Jake said, "I didn't want to say this until I had checked with Simone. She's part owner of my business. But we'd like to go your halves. JKL and Associates would like to fund half the build." "That's far too generous,"
Emily cried. "Why not? It's as much about advertising our business as it is about you starting one, remember?" Emily was about to say that it was her cottage on her property. But of course it would be their property when they were married. Though the engagement hadn't been mentioned again, perhaps he was having second thoughts. She shook the momentary doubt aside and returned to the conversation at hand.
"That would be great, but only if you're sure."
She knew how lame and ungrateful her response probably sounded, but was unable to do anything about it. "Only if you're sure." Jake took her hand. "I don't want to push you into anything you don't want, Emily. I know I pushed you into the engagement yesterday." "Right, okay. So we definitely are engaged." "I don't want you thinking it's some plot to get hold of your land or something," he added, sounding flustered. Emily thought nothing of the sort. Well, she hadn't until now that he mentioned it. It was all happening so fast. Was she ready for this level of commitment? "Of course you are."
"Thank you, Jake. I really appreciate the offer. It's very generous of you."
"Well, it's not without its perks for me. So what do you think?"
"I think let's go for it,"
Emily said with a firm nod of her head. She and Jake formally shook on the deal before pulling each other into a tight hug. Their embrace was becoming more when Jake abruptly pulled himself away. "I'd better get these back to town." Emily was putting egg sandwiches together for a late lunch when she looked up at hearing the glass door slide open. God, he's a gorgeous specimen of a man, she thought, watching him saunter in. And he's my man. Her stomach flip-flopped.
"All in order at the council?"
she asked. "Yep, all good. Fingers crossed we get an answer next week," he said, crossing over and sweeping her to him.
"Yes, fingers crossed."
"Oh, and I got you something," Jake said, putting a carry bag with hardware store insignia on it on the end of the table. "Doris thought these would be your size." He was grinning cheekily as he first brought out a pair of leather rigger's gloves.
Oh, how romantic, she said sardonically.
And, wait for it, your very own mason's hammer, he said, bringing out a hammer with what looked like a chisel on one end.
Goody,
Emily said, clapping her hands with excitement.
I can't wait to get started.
Can't say I don't bring you presents, Jake said, leaning over to kiss her on the lips.
Come on, lunch is ready. Let's eat,
Emily said. Yes, we're going to need our stamina. They ate while Jake explained, between mouthfuls, his plan for moving forward with the project. Emily listened and nodded her agreement occasionally. This was Jake's bread and butter. He knew exactly what he was doing, so she was happy to take instructions. First, they would take the front-end loader over and load into it whatever timber could be salvaged. This would be stacked into the newly moved hay shed. Some of the old timber might later make great seating and storage boxes outside in the proposed courtyard. In the meantime, though, it would be tidy and out of the weather. David was coming to help with the heavy lifting, Jake added, just as Emily was wondering if she'd be strong enough to help lift the big roof sections. Apparently, he wanted the iron for something or other back at his farm. There's so much great material to be salvaged, he enthused. It's just a matter of taking the time and making the effort to sort it out. It is the slow way to clear a site, but totally worth doing. It would probably be easier to take the iron, still mostly attached to the large timber beams, and toss it all into a dump somewhere. But Emily was pleased at the consideration being given to recycling. An hour later, Emily drove the bright, shiny ute over to the site. She was surprised to find it not nearly as cumbersome as she'd imagined. It actually had good visibility all the way around, better even than her car. Perhaps it was because she was that bit higher up.
You know, I think I quite like you, she told the vehicle approvingly. In the tray behind her, a mass of tools rattled about, and the trailer on the back banged loudly as she went over the bumps. Jake followed her in the small tractor with the front-end loader bucket on it. She stood surveying the huge pile of debris with her hands on her hips. The throaty idle of the tractor ended as the machine was turned off.
Right, so where do we start? Jake said, appearing beside her. Emily looked up at him.
I was just wondering that exact thing, she said.
It had sounded so much more straightforward back at the house. Perhaps they should just load it all into tipper trucks and hide it back behind some scrub somewhere, like so many farmers seemed to do. I'm only teasing, Jake said. It's not as bad as it looks. It's not unlike starting a jigsaw puzzle, really. Separating the timber and other stuff from the rock will be like taking out all the edge pieces. That made sense.
Okay, so what shall I do?
Emily asked. Put your gloves on. I'm going to show you how to clean up the stone while we wait for David.
Okay.
Right. First, get it so it's comfortable in your hands. Emily watched while Jake turned a stone around in his hands before picking up the special mason's hammer. Being old mortar, it's pretty loose and crumbly. All you should have to do is gently tap on it, and it'll come off. He tapped with the hammer, a lot more gently than Emily thought would be needed. Sure enough, the mortar just fell away. Just keep turning it and tapping away until the rock is clean. You'll get the odd stubborn bit. With these, you just use this chisel-shaped end to find the seam where it joins the rock and tap. Again, you don't need brute strength. You don't want to crack the rock, just gently prise the mortar off. It'll make more sense when you start doing it. Here, you give it a go. Emily accepted the rock and hammer Jake handed her. She turned the rock over, chose a spot to start on, and tapped. A large chunk of mortar came off and shattered in the bucket below her. She grinned up at Jake. See, not so hard, he said. You're a natural.
Thanks,
Emily said. It wasn't hard, but she did have to keep her wits about her, or else she ran the risk of banging her fingers with the hammer. Jake wanted the smaller rocks separated from the larger ones, and put examples at Emily's feet. They were umming and ahhing over what to do with the waste when Emily wondered aloud if it would work like gravel for filling potholes in the farm tracks. There was also an area at the back of the sheep yards that she knew got boggy in winter. Perfect, Jake declared.
OK.
Emily was getting more confident.
For now, why don't we fill the trailer and then dump it behind the sheep yards? Then we can use it to fill potholes later.
So there she sat on an upturned bucket, picking up rocks, gently but firmly chipping the mortar off into another bucket, and then tossing the clean rocks into one of the two piles depending on their size. The first time Emily stood up and tried to lift her waste bucket to empty it into the trailer, she thought her arms might drop off. She sheepishly called Jake over to lift it. She'd thought she could lift a 3/4 full bucket, but had totally overestimated her strength and underestimated the weight of the mortar. Maybe in a few days when you've built up your muscles, Jake said encouragingly, neither mocking her nor being exasperated by her needing his help. Until then, perhaps just fill it to half. He smiled kindly. Emily got into a rhythm and was able to block out all the goings-on around her. She liked the simple monotony of the task, the little bit of thought required, and the feeling that she was actually achieving something. They had a hell of a long way to go, but she could see she was making slight headway. Slowly but surely. That's what Gran would have said. At one point she heard a vehicle coming in off the road towards them. She glanced up and saw David's ute with Grace on the back. Her heart swelled. She'd really missed the little dog. When she looked back down to her piles of cleaned rock, she was pleasantly surprised and quietly chuffed with her efforts. But by golly, would she need a long soak in a hot bath later. Her back was already starting to ache. That night, after a warm bath and dinner, she lay on the bed for a massage. Jake said in a serious tone that it would help her muscles recover so she wouldn't be too sore to do it all over again tomorrow. She played along, soaking up his touch, and by the time he moved on to areas that had nothing to do with muscles she'd used in her manual labour, she was almost too relaxed to respond. Almost, but not quite. Chapter 20. Thankfully, the predicted wet weather didn't occur, and over the next few days they got into a great routine, leaving the house straight after breakfast with an esky of food, thermoses of tea and coffee, and a large bottle filled with ice and water. It was better to get a full day in, and there were times when Emily knew if she went back to the house and sat somewhere comfortable, she might not be able to get up and return to the worksite. It was hard but satisfying work. She still sometimes worried about Jake, but rather than nag him, she decided to keep an eye out and make sure he took enough rest breaks. The same went for Des. Emily had accepted her father's offer of help, but emphasised that he wasn't expected to put in a full day's manual labour. He had been popping by now and then, the first 2 times right at smoko time. Though he tried to hide his disappointment at only finding sandwiches, she noted that his arrivals then tended to be after lunch. On the morning of their first full day, a hire toilet had been delivered. Emily had no idea where it had come from, though there were probably all sorts of local businesses catering to the needs of the building industry. She'd just never needed to know about them before. The more services and tradespeople Jake unearthed, the bigger the district seemed to get. It was like there was a whole subculture going on she didn't know about. It took David and Jake 3 full days to separate the debris from the stone. Wood they stacked into the shed for safekeeping. Other debris, like the horsehair and plaster ceilings, they took to the council's refuse dump. Luckily, they hadn't had asbestos to deal with. The original cottage predated its use and had never been renovated or extended. They had made an allowance in the budget to get professionals in should any be found, so they saved quite a bit of money there. But Jake warned Emily not to get too excited, as sometimes other areas blew out down the track, like the travel and accommodation expenses they'd had to since factor in. What mattered was how the figures looked at the end, he said, adding confidently that his projects usually came in on budget. After the first week, Emily's muscles had settled down and she was starting to feel tight and well-toned rather than sore. Gradually, she increased the weight in her bucket, which saved her a little time by not having to get up and empty it so often. On the 9th day, Jake, Emily, Des and David were sitting on their row of upturned buckets chipping away at mortar. They mostly worked in silence. With the tapping of hammers and the radio in the background, they had to raise their voices to have a decent conversation, so they tended not to. Every so often they broke into song when a favourite tune came on, but mostly they were content to be lost in their tasks and own thoughts. Emily was really enjoying the routine and sense of accomplishment, especially working alongside the guys and being considered an equal. With them spending most of their time on the building site, there was little news from town. Jake and David had brought back groceries after their visits to the dump, but Emily now needed to do a decent shop. As much as she was looking forward to a change of scenery for a few hours, she didn't like the idea of her share of work stopping. But there was no choice. They needed to eat. The sound of a vehicle in the distance distracted Emily from her thoughts. When it became clear the vehicle was approaching, she looked up. Barbara's car was turning in. They hadn't been in touch for more than a week, and Emily missed her friend. She felt a little guilty about not checking to see how Barbara's pregnancy was going, but she had been falling into bed each evening not long after eating. Her face lit up into a broad grin as she watched her friend get out of the car. "Hi, everyone," Barbara called, as she walked towards them carrying a cardboard box. "Having fun yet?" David quickly vacated his bucket seat, relieved his wife of the box, and urged her to sit down. "It's so good to see you," Emily cried. She was about to pull Barbara into a tight hug, but took a quick glance down her front, which was filthy with dirt, spiders' webs, and mortar dust. Instead, she stepped back and raised a hand in a lame, helpless sort of greeting. Barbara smiled in return, but she really wasn't her usual buoyant self. Perhaps the pregnancy was making her feel tired. As Barbara sat down beside her, Emily thought she detected the smallest of baby bumps. "I come bearing gifts," Barbara said wearily from her spot perched on the bucket. "Thought you people might like some cake and scones since you're probably living on sandwiches. I got bored with resting and watching daytime television." "Oh, yeah," David said, rubbing his hands together. "You little ripper," said Des. They all ate greedily, devouring scones with cheese and tomato, and cheese and gherkin, and others with jam and cream, tossing Grace the occasional morsel. They left the cake until last. "I've missed you," Emily finally said. "Me too," Barbara replied. "I'm so sorry I can't be here helping." "I wouldn't expect you to. I'm just sorry I can't be keeping you company." "I'm a big girl, Em. It's not your job to entertain me. Hopefully this time next year I'll be popping by your gallery for a cuppa with a baby in tow," she said wistfully, staring down at her hand resting on her stomach. "I look forward to it and being the best sort of auntie in the world," Emily declared. "Careful what you offer, or else I might be dumping it on you when the screaming gets too much." Barbara laughed tightly. Emily wondered how Barbara was brave enough to go down that path again after losing 2 babies. She couldn't imagine the pain she must have gone through. Whilst she didn't have any direct comparisons, she knew if anything happened to Grace, she'd never recover from her heartbreak. Yet Barbara was still able to be light-hearted. Was she using mild gallows humour to ease her fears? As a friend, she should perhaps be encouraging her to talk about it. But the miscarriages had happened before they'd met, and she didn't want to pry. Then again, sweeping these things under the carpet and pretending they had never happened was something Enid would do, and such an old-fashioned response. That wasn't considered a healthy course of action these days, was it? "Oh, no, I'm sure your baby will be perfectly well behaved. No screaming, no projectile vomiting," Emily said. "Ha ha, one can only hope. So, you seem to be making some headway?" Barbara said. "It's very slow, but we are getting there. I can't wait until the foundations are poured and the walls start going up. It'll be wonderful to look across from the bedroom and see progress rather than a pile of rocks." "David tells me Jake's got some guys coming from Melbourne to do the stonework." "Yes, they should be here in a few weeks. It's a bit of an expensive option, but there's no one around here who Jake knows well enough to trust with something like this. At least they'll be staying here with us, which will keep costs down and save them time running back and forth to town each day." "But God, just think of the cooking involved," Barbara said. "Oh well, no pain, no gain, they say. And I'll need something to do to keep me occupied after being over here day after day.
It's been an experience, but somehow I don't think I'll miss chipping mortar off rocks for hours on end, Emily said.
No, I imagine not. Surely there's an easier way, Barbara said, looking around and frowning.
Not if you want to reuse old stone. It's actually not too bad. Quite therapeutic, in fact.
Well, I'll take your word for that, Barbara said. After the last of the cake was gone, they drained their cups, screwed them onto the tops of the thermoses, helped Barbara repack the box, and then waved her off. They had been back at work for a few minutes when Jake's mobile rang and he stepped away to take it. Emily had got used to tuning out his conversations while she worked, and also tuning out her concerns that he was doing too much. He was looking great, and the night sweats seemed to have stopped. He'd assured her the jittery feeling had lessened too. His hands still sometimes shook a bit as he held his cutlery, but that could be put down to all the work they were doing. Her own shook sometimes as well. She looked up at hearing Jake exclaim, "We've done it! We've got council approval! We can officially start!" he cried. They leapt up and jumped about, Jake, Emily and David, dancing around in a circle like children. Des looked on, smirking and shaking his head slowly in mirth. Grace just looked confused. Chapter 21. From then on, the pace seemed to go up a gear. A few days after news of the council approval, David announced that the Bureau of Meteorology's long-range forecast was indicating that the winter crop-growing season would break in mid-April. That gave them about 9 weeks to get as much done as possible before the rain came. Meanwhile, David would also need 2 weeks at the end of February to shear his sheep and Emily's, all depending on the weather, of course. Almost everything to do with farm life was reliant on the weather. Emily hadn't really thought about the significance of Jake's birthday being near the end of April before, other than their apparently excellent astrological compatibility. Now she realised that, as he had promised to drive David's second tractor during seeding, there was no point trying to organise a trip away or probably even a barbecue. He'd be too busy. Since she'd found out when his birthday was, she'd been unsuccessfully racking her brain for a gift. What did you get a successful guy who could probably afford to buy anything he wanted? A few days on a tractor? Well, whether he wanted it or not, that's what he'd be getting. And probably a whole lot more than a few days. Poor fellow. She could imagine it turning into one of those careful what you wish for situations. The only thing Emily remained a little concerned about was that there had been no further discussion of their engagement. It was as if it had been forgotten, or had never happened in the first place. A couple of times it was on the tip of her tongue to mention it, but each time she chickened out. She really was trying so hard to not be like Enid. Just let things happen and not nag or control. She hadn't had much to do with her mother recently. They'd had a brief conversation where Emily had declined an invitation to dinner. She was simply too tired from chipping mortar all day. Predictably, Enid got all huffy. It was fine for her to be busy, but apparently not for Emily, and put Des on the phone. But instead of trying to persuade Emily to change her mind, he'd chatted excitedly about the project's progress. One evening, Emily emerged from the pantry with her arms full of dinner ingredients and found Jake on the phone. There was nothing unusual about that, but the frown on his face as he paced back and forth piqued her concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked when he'd ended the call. He ran a hand through his hair. "One of the Melbourne jobs has had to be halted. The client's run out of cash." "Oh no, that's terrible. Does that mean you'll lose money?" "Not a lot. At the most 30 grand. I can wear it if I have to. Thankfully, the progress payments are up to date." "God, not a lot. $30,000 sounds like a lot to me." "I suppose, but not in the context of the whole job," he said with a shrug. "Anyway, it's not something I'm going to waste time worrying about him, so you shouldn't worry about it either," he added, grasping her gently by the shoulders and looking into her eyes before kissing her on the forehead. God, to not have a problem with losing 30 grand.
He must be very successful indeed, Emily thought, feeling a whole new sense of respect for Jake. They'd never discussed Jake's financial situation in any great detail. If they were officially engaged, should they be discussing merging finances, getting a joint bank account? "The good news," he continued, "is that my team will be here in a few days." Instantly, Emily's brain started whirring with all that had to be done to make 5 men comfortable. Upon first mention of the team coming across from Melbourne, she had expressed concern about where they would fit them. After a few phone calls, Jake had assured her they were happy to stay in Swags in the shearing shed. It might be different if the weather was cold, but as it was, it would be okay. Emily couldn't believe they would be happy to spend months in Swags on a hard floor. They must really like him, she decided. They'd agreed that if it got too cold or too much for the men, they would scout around the district and find caravans for them. And with that agreement, Emily had put the accommodation side of things out of her mind. They would come up to the house to eat and shower. It would be a strain, but it had to be done if the project was going to come along as quickly as possible and remain within budget. In a way, Emily was looking forward to retreating to the kitchen and playing host. But another part of her would miss being in the thick of the action, making a visible contribution. Fueling the workers was important, but it wasn't the same as actually being out there. Emily also worried about backlash from businesses in Wattle Creek for bringing in labour from elsewhere, but there was nothing she could do about it. They would have hired local people if available, but as Jake had explained, stonemasonry wasn't the same as bricklaying. They'd be hiring a local concreter, electricians, roofers and cabinet makers when the time came. In the meantime, they'd have to cop whatever flack they got on the chin. By Wednesday, the 22nd of February, David and Jake and Emily had most of the stone cleaned and divided into 2 different sizes. David announced that he wouldn't be available for the next 2 weeks. He was shearing Emily's sheep down here and then his own up at his place the week after. He again declined Jake and Emily's offer of stopping what they were doing to help. He had a good team set up. David's crew brought all their own food, so Emily wouldn't have to feed them. Soon she would have 5 men to feed full-time anyway. Grace had proven herself, and she was excited that David wanted to use her. He had put her through her paces, and she had turned out to be a natural in both the yards and the paddock. And she was still very young, so would only get better. Emily puffed up with motherly pride at the thought. She thought back to her first ever conversation with Barbara when she'd gone to pick up the tiny puppy. Grace was the runt of the litter, and hadn't been wanted by anyone else because she was so much smaller than the others. Well, so much for that. She was also glad that Grace would be occupied. It was much better than being locked in the house yard, which she would need to be to keep her safe from all the extra foot and vehicle traffic. She felt dreadful locking up Grace, but they were expecting Jake's team from Melbourne at any moment. Speaking of which, she thought, as a dual cab ute with 5 men aboard arrived on site. As the men poured out of the vehicle, Jake greeted them like they were great mates. She heard them ribbing him gently about not taking long off work after all. "Missed you guys too much," Jake said in reply. "This is David, a friend who's been helping out. And this is Emily," he said with his arm around her. "She's co-boss, so just watch out," he said with a laugh. "Em, this is Toby, Ben, Stan, Bill and Aaron." "Hi, Emily, lovely to meet you," they each said, whilst offering their right hands. "Likewise. Thanks so much for coming. I'll try not to be too bossy," she said, smiling and shaking hands with each of them in turn, whilst desperately trying to commit their names to memory. A couple of them, blonde, blue-eyed Toby and pale, red-headed Aaron in particular, had a bit of a larrikin look about them. Emily pegged them at around her age or maybe a bit younger. Stan and Ben were older, nearer early to mid-40s, and a little shyer. Bill, the oldest of the group, had more salt than pepper in his mid-brown hair and had the weathered look of someone who had spent most of his life in the sun. She warmed to them instantly. They all seemed like really nice guys. It would be fun having them around. Despite the long drive from Melbourne with only a night in Adelaide, they got right to work. Jake unrolled the plans on the back canopy of the ute whilst gesturing in the direction and general layout of things. While David returned to work on the rocks, Emily left to go back to the house. She had to finish preparing for the big barbecue she'd organised to welcome them and double-check that everything was organised regarding their accommodation. Until David had finished with the shearing shed, the men would be sleeping in the house's 2 spare rooms. She'd gathered 5 swags: John's, her own, only ever used once, David's, Barbara's, and one they'd borrowed from Grant, but left it up to them to decide if they wanted to share the double beds or camp out on the floor. After deciding it would be a nightmare trying to keep track of towels if they were all the same colour, Emily, taught by Enid, only ever had sets of matching towels, hand towels, bath mats and face washers. She had gone to town one afternoon and bought 5 new towels in different colours. Now she put up a clothes area in the enclosed veranda for the stonemasons to keep them on. Chapter 22. From the kitchen window, Emily watched the sheep race past the house on their way down to the yards. Her heart swelled and she felt a wave of emotion as Grace came into sight behind them, making her way back and forth, pushing them forward. She seemed to be doing a great job. Next came David's ute with Sasha aboard. Emily laughed, feeling like the proudest mum in the world. She reluctantly dragged herself away and got back to work on dinner. She yearned for a nana nap, but she had too much to do to stop for even half an hour. The welcome barbecue had been a triumph. The 5 guys, her parents, Barbara and David, Nathan and Sarah, Bob and his wife, Grant and Steve and their wives, and 2 babies had all joined in to celebrate the official start of the building. Everyone seemed to have got along well and had fun, and they'd all raved about the food, especially the pavlova piled high with cream and fresh fruit she'd served for dessert. She was glad that Nathan and Sarah had made it. They still hadn't got around to inviting her and Jake over. Emily quietly suspected they were too busy getting to know each other intimately, so it was good to have them over at last. It had been getting harder to find excuses to dodge Enid's invitations, though, and she had figured the opportunity of notching up a dinner with her mother whilst being busy with other guests was too good to pass up. Besides, she'd really wanted her dad there for what was both a kick-off party for the cottage and thank you to the other guys for doing the shed. She'd also wanted Jake's mates to meet some locals. She didn't want them feeling they were stuck at the farm on their time off. Thankfully, it hadn't been too late a night, with everyone having left by 10 and the guys settled in their rooms by 10:30. The stonemasons had even insisted on staying to help her clean up. That night the kitchen was a hive of chatter as the Melbourne men talked excitedly of seeing sheep being shorn, most of them for the first time ever. "It doesn't hurt them at all," Toby said. "I thought it would, but it doesn't." "They don't pluck them, mate, it's just clippers. Like what you should use on your hair occasionally," Stan said. "I didn't mean the actual shearing. It always seemed a bit harsh, them being dragged across the floor when you see it on the telly."
"I wouldn't like to be stooped over like that all day. You can see why those blokes need so many breaks," Bill said.
"It's because you're old," Aaron said. Out of the corner of her eye, Emily saw him pick up a bread roll and aim, but then put it down again after a glare from Jake. "I can't get over how precise it all is with the testing of the fleeces and categorising them. And how careful they are with contamination. It's really very clean." "Yeah, probably cleaner than your house, eh, Tobes?" "Yeah, probably."
"Your dog was amazing, Emily. Pretty gutsy for such a little thing, climbing on all those big woolly beasts. David told us she's never actually been trained. It's incredible," Bill said.
Emily beamed back. "I snuck a peek when they came past the house. I felt all silly, like a proud mother." "Where is she anyway?" Stan asked, looking around. "She's staying with David for a fortnight until he's finished his own shearing, playing at being a real farm dog."
"Well, it looked like she was loving every minute of it."
"I just hope she'll want to come home eventually." "Don't worry, if necessary, we'll mount a covert operation to kidnap her for you," Aaron said. "You can't do anything quiet, Aaron, with feet that big," Toby said, laughing. The others joined in. Thanks, Aaron, I'll let you know, Emily said, playing along. She really enjoyed their banter. I hope you won't find the shearing shed too smelly to sleep in. They're a bit on the nose straight after shearing, Emily said.
Nah, we'll be right, Bill said. Won't we, fellas?
A chorus of yep made its way around the table. If not, there are always the spare beds and floor space.
Oh, I think it might be scarred for life from the pink in that room as it is, Toby said. Ignore him, Emily. It's a nice colour, and don't you worry about us, Stan said. I was only kidding, Toby said. I actually don't mind it.
It's okay, Toby. I know it's an acquired taste, Emily reassured him, smiling at the thought of David's reaction. It is very pink. For the first week the Melbourne guys were there, Emily would stay for a cuppa and look over progress whenever she could spare the time after delivering the meals. There didn't seem to be much going on in the beginning, mainly tidying up the site and levelling the building area. She couldn't wait to see stone walls going up. Thankfully, the weather was kind, and all the rain they had occurred overnight. Nor was David's shearing affected. Each evening he managed to get enough sheep safely under cover for the next day's work. Every night Jake spent an hour or so updating her on progress while they lay in bed. They didn't have a lot of other time to themselves away from the men, and the only time they seemed to have the energy to make love was on Sunday mornings. She was a little disconcerted that they had settled into such a companionable way of life so quickly, but she told herself it was temporary and that their situation was quite an unusual one. It wasn't as if she didn't still find Jake hugely attractive. Every time she looked at him, her heart skipped a beat, and a tingle ran right through her down to her toes. Seeing the ease with which he directed the guys, and the way he managed the project whilst remaining calm and even-tempered, and not even all that stressed, was very impressive. And a big turn-on. The man was quite something. She quite often found herself hovering with her box of food, listening to him, feeling awestruck by him, and very grateful she had him in her life. Emily hoped Jake was okay with the way things were, but kept her thoughts to herself. She wasn't about to raise their significantly reduced sex life and introduce a problem if there wasn't one. She worked hard to keep the amazement that he had chosen her at bay. It was negative, and she was trying so hard not to be. A lifetime of not measuring up in her mother's eyes would most likely always remain with her. But she was finally beginning to address the self-esteem issues that had plagued her for so long. Emily was an adult and responsible for her own happiness, as Barbara had pointed out more than once. She was doing her best to retrain herself to be more positive, not depend on her mother's approval, and not let her past and her insecurities negatively affect her future. She was good enough, damn it. There was no reason why she couldn't achieve whatever she wanted to. The Sunday after he finished shearing her sheep, David brought down an old television, DVD player, and set-top box for the boys. "This might make it feel less like you're living back home with Mum and Dad, fellas," he announced. It had been too crowded for all of them to sit and watch television in the lounge, but they hadn't complained. They'd instead taken to playing poker around the huge kitchen table. Aaron and Toby had so far not revealed themselves to be major pranksters or larrikins, well, not in Emily's vicinity, but both had quite the lucky streak when it came to Texas Hold'em. Stan had turned out to be a good cook, and whenever he had the time, he was inside offering to help Emily. He confessed that cooking was what he did to relax, and she was only too happy to indulge him. He was coming up later to make bread on his day off. Ben had also proven a great help and wouldn't leave the house until the kitchen was tidy. He also liked to help with cooking and was good with instructions, but wasn't as confident as Stan. Emily was so used to having her kitchen to herself it was taking a bit of getting used to. But she was really enjoying having them there and playing mother to all 5 men. Late in the afternoon, Emily joined in as everyone stood in the shearing shed with their fingers crossed, biting on bottom lips, hoping the TV would get good enough reception through the rabbit ear's antenna. After lots of tweaking, they'd managed to achieve a reasonably clear picture. Hopefully it would hold when the warm, still weather became more unsettled with the onset of autumn. Chapter 23. After the second week, Barbara started dropping in after lunch for a quick cuppa after she'd been into town. Emily would stop for 10 minutes before resuming her buzzing around, chattering away as she got on with things. That was one of the great things about their relationship. She could just be herself. It was a busy time, but Barbara was as happy as Emily to just have the company for an hour or so. And there was no expectation that she would stop what she was doing and then start up in a mad panic again to catch up later. Barbara helped her fill sandwiches and cut and butter cake and do simple tasks, but was equally happy to sit back and stay out of the way. They'd both done enough catering to know that it was sometimes easier to just let someone do their thing and not waste their time explaining a process in order for the other person to assist. On the other hand, Enid didn't get it at all. She had dropped by once in the first week and entered the kitchen like a tornado, demanding to know what she could do. Emily had firmly told her mother that she was welcome to sit and have a cup of tea, but that she didn't have time to stop. And, no thank you, she had everything under control. Enid had sat at the table tapping her fingers impatiently. Clearly, she thought if she waited long enough, Emily would stop what she was doing and give her the attention she demanded. She eventually left with a harumph and, "Well, if you don't need me, I'll be off," after draining her cup. "See you, thanks for the visit," Emily had called over her shoulder from the bench where she was making a meatloaf for lunch. She was especially grateful for the extra pair of hands in the laundry when Barbara visited. Emily had taken on the guys' washing since they were working so hard, and she didn't like them having to do it on their only day off. It was more work than she'd expected, but it wasn't hard, just a matter of fitting in the loading, unloading, hanging out and bringing in around her other tasks. The gift of efficiency was at least one good thing she had inherited from Enid. Though working with your best friend was nothing like working with your overbearing, critical mother. On the days Barbara visited, her friend would get in a load of washing and fold it while she pegged out another lot on the line. One afternoon they were sorting a load of freshly dried laundry. "You need to get someone in to help," Barbara said. "I couldn't trust the cooking to anyone but you." "Sorry, but I can't do it." "Of course you can't. You've got to rest and take care of your baby. But there's no need to apologise." "I suppose it would be a ridiculous waste to have someone come and just do the washing," Barbara said thoughtfully. "Yeah. They'd spend all their time sitting around, waiting for the machine to do its thing." "I actually did a ring around the other day looking for a cleaner, just out of curiosity." "Well, I could certainly palm off the dusting, vacuuming and cleaning of the bathroom and toilet right about now." "Sadly, I couldn't find anyone." "Bugger." "Hey, maybe we should start a cleaning company," Barbara said, after a few moments of silent folding. We both hate cleaning, remember?" Emily replied with a laugh. "Well, we wouldn't be doing it. We'd be the bosses just running the show." "Except, of course, for having no one to do the cleaning, which is our current problem, remember?" Not to mention the fact that I have a paddock full of men building me an art gallery, and you're going to have your hands full with a new baby soon." "Yes. I'm still trying not to think about it." "Come on, Barb, you can't jinx it. You know that. Aren't you always telling me that these things are out of our hands? What will be, will be?" "Apparently I'm much better at running someone else's life than my own," she replied, smiling weakly. "It will be fine, Barbara. You need to stop worrying and start living again. All this worry can't be good for the baby, can it?" She stopped short of pointing out that Barbara was running the risk of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy if her own views of the universe and its workings were to be believed. Again, Emily wondered where all Barbara's positivity and faith had got to. "Come on. Time to feed the workers," she said, trying to change the subject and lighten the mood. "I really don't have the knack Barbara does with pep talks," she thought, putting the milk in the top of the large box. The first day she'd tried to carry everything over in an effort to make up for missing her morning walks. She hadn't had a proper walk since they'd begun cleaning the stone. But by the time she'd got to the building site, she'd been almost ready to drop the heavy box. Now she made the short trips back and forth in the car. Sometimes one of the guys did the afternoon smoko run, but today Jake had specially asked Emily to come across. They worked it out via UHF radio. The day after the guys arrived, he had been into town and returned with a few handheld devices so they could all communicate free of charge rather than the expense of using mobile phones. Curious about why Jake had specially asked her to come across this afternoon, Emily and Barbara arrived a few minutes before 3. She gave her father a hug hello. "What's going on?" she asked.
"You'll see,"
he replied and winked. Emily and Barbara exchanged shrugs as the other men scurried around nearby.
"Right, all ready to go?"
Jake said, looking around the group. There was a chorus of murmurs of "Yep."
"Stan, you do the honours,"
Jake said. He grasped Emily gently by the shoulders and turned her towards what she knew would be the front of the cottage. She felt the realization dawn as she watched Stan trowel a bed of mortar onto the concrete foundation and then place a stone on top, carefully pushing it down and tapping it into place with the handle of the trowel. A cheer went up, followed by a round of applause. Emily's chin began to wobble. "Oh, wow," Barbara said beside her. "God, I think I'm going to cry." Emily felt Barbara's hand grasp hers and her father's hand squeeze her shoulder. She turned to them in turn, wanting to speak or at least smile, acknowledge them somehow. Here were the 3 people who had given her the most support during the hardest time of her life. Where would she be without them? All she could do was bite down on her lip and try to keep the tears at bay. This stone was the official line in the sand. Everything would be better now. She turned her tear-filled eyes to Jake. "Thank you. Thank you. You don't know how much this means."
"Oh, come here,"
he said, kissing her and pulling her into his chest. Chapter 24. March passed. Once the walls started going up, the building progressed very quickly. Each day, Emily looked out her bedroom window and saw the piles of cleaned stone getting smaller and the walls growing higher. It was looking more and more like a bigger version of her old, beloved cottage. They'd had a very dry period with mild weather and hadn't suffered any downtime on the building project, but in early April, clouds began to gather. 10 weeks into the project, and around 7 weeks after the Melbourne stonemasons had turned up, Emily was well entrenched in her new routine. Thursday morning dawned overcast, just like the Weather Bureau had been forecasting. Around town, the farmers had been getting antsy about the lack of rain. David hadn't really commented beyond sticking with the Bureau's original prediction of a break in the season around the 20th of April. That date was still a week away. He was philosophical, like Barbara usually was. He would often shrug and say that no amount of worry and complaining would help. While they were eating lunch, the sky darkened and rain began to fall, beating down heavily on the iron roof.
"So, when do we start on the tractors?"
Jake asked.
"At this rate, we'll have enough to get started tomorrow, but I'd like to give it a couple of days to soak in and for the weeds to poke their heads up. That way, when we go over it, we'll deal with them at the same time."
"That makes sense," Jake said.
"I'm looking forward to doing my bit."
Jake had told Emily a number of times how keen he was to see how another part of farming worked.
"You okay to leave the cottage project?"
"Yep, no worries.
The guys know what they're doing. It won't be long until they're done and the local roofers can start. I'll only be a phone call away. It should be fine."
Emily would miss the guys when they headed back to Melbourne. They were nice, cheerful, respectful fellows who really livened up the place. She would miss the banter around the huge kitchen table. The attention they'd given her, being the only woman amongst so many men, had been nice too. Not that there had been any flirting or innuendo, or even dirty jokes for that matter. They'd kept things very clean in her presence, She hadn't even heard the F word uttered. Even though she was around the same age as the younger guys, it was as if they considered her more like their mother and like a younger sister to Bill and Stan. Such was their treatment of her and their effusive praise of her cooking. It had been fun, but she certainly wouldn't miss all the extra work involved in having them staying. At least the roofers and other trades that would be following them would bring their own lunch and thermoses. She would still take over cake and batches of scones, knowing that the way to a man's heart really was through his stomach. If the builders were happy, they'd turn up each day until their work was done and not disappear and leave the project behind schedule. It had worked so far, anyway. Jake was in regular contact with Simone, and Emily often chatted to her of an evening after he had finished updating her regarding the project and discussing business matters. On a couple of occasions, Simone had said she was keen to come over and see it all firsthand. Emily had always suspected it was one of those throwaway lines, so she was surprised when Simone phoned a week before Easter and asked if she could impose on them for the long weekend. Despite it being so late in the year, Easter had snuck up on them all. Only a week or so ago, she'd realised she and Jake had completely forgotten Valentine's Day. Months ago now. She couldn't recall now what had reminded her, but she was glad Jake had forgotten too. She'd always considered it a ridiculously commercial event, and she'd had enough trouble thinking up a birthday gift for him. At least with Easter, the gifts were obvious. Emily was thrilled that Jake would have his sister there for his birthday, not that they were planning a huge celebration. Jake, like Emily, wasn't one for giving birthdays much acknowledgement. She told Simone an emphatic yes, but warned her that Jake might not be around much due to them hopefully getting stuck into sowing the crops. It was a pity Jake would be busy helping David on the farm, but it would have been the same if the holiday had occurred earlier. Only then it would have been the building project keeping him occupied. Emily was really looking forward to getting to know Jake's sister better in person. It would also be the perfect opportunity to discuss the subject of her exhibiting, which she hadn't actually mentioned to her as yet. She'd been telling herself she was putting it off in case she changed her mind about the building becoming a gallery, but really she was concerned that, like Jake had, Simone would decline the opportunity to have her art hung in public for sale. That she'd chatted on the phone excitedly about getting back into painting did bode well, but Emily didn't want to rush things and scare her off. The weekend would prove the perfect opportunity to have that particular conversation and to pick Simone's brain for decorating ideas. The stonemasonry team was working hard to get back to Melbourne in time for Easter. Bill and Stan were keen to get back to their families and do the Easter egg hunt they did every year. Aaron, Ben and Toby wanted to watch Collingwood play live at the MCG on the Saturday. No wonder they all get on so well, Jake had said one night after he'd found out they all supported the same team. Emily wasn't into AFL, or any sport for that matter, but she knew of people so passionate they even came to blows with opposing supporters. She imagined it was rare to get so many Melbourne people in one room who supported the one team. Bill and Stan were also Collingwood supporters, but not quite as ardent as the younger fellows. Their project really did seem to be blessed. Emily hoped for their sake they would be finished by Easter. Simone would be staying in Emily's office. Although it had been empty since the men had moved down to the shearing shed, she hadn't had a chance to look for bookshelves to complete her reading nook. In fact, she was a little ashamed to admit she had barely stepped foot in it since adding the pieces of furniture. She and Jake tended to sit at the kitchen table or in bed with his laptop working on the budgets and going over things. The non-cottage paperwork was still piled up and unfiled in the other room. When she thought about it, the amount of stuff she had to do was quite overwhelming. And when she started the business, there would probably never be an opportunity to sit and read for pleasure. All she hoped was that Jake and David would be able to spare at least a few hours off the tractors for them to spend all together. A barbecue at one of the picturesque spots on her farm or David and Barbara's would be great to give Simone a real rural experience. As Jake had done all those months ago when he'd visited Emily, Simone was going to fly to Whyalla, collect a hire car and drive herself to Wattle Creek. She was planning to arrive mid-afternoon on Good Friday, the 22nd.
This is the end of CD 5. The book continues on CD 6. CD 6.
Chapter 25. 2 days before the Easter long weekend, the stonemasons finally completed their work on the building across the way. Emily was very chuffed when they called her over before putting the final stone in place. And she, Jake, David and the guys all left their mark by carefully carving their initials in the mortar. It was a wonderful, permanent reminder of their contribution. Now, when she threw open the bedroom curtains, she was greeted by nice, straight stone walls standing tall. And she was truly a part of it. Soon the building would look less naked and exposed when the roofers did their work and the joiners put in doors and windows. Everything seemed to be slotting into place perfectly. They had a farewell dinner for the guys on Wednesday night. Jake had offered them a choice between a night out at the pub or a roast dinner at home, and to Emily's surprise, they'd gone with lamb roast. She couldn't believe they'd want something so stock standard, especially when she'd already cooked them numerous roasts. But the weather was dreary outside, and as Jake pointed out, these were city folk who hadn't had a lifetime of good country fare. And they had spent a few Saturday nights out in the pub with Grant and Steve and Nathan. So they stayed in, and Emily did a roast with all the trimmings. To compensate for what she considered a simple meal, hell, she'd made dozens, maybe hundreds of roast dinners in her time. She made rich, individual chocolate fondant puddings from a recipe she'd seen recently on a cooking show. Afterwards, the guys headed back to the shearing shed for the last time, going on about how good the food was and how full they were. Emily was pleased, even more so when Jake showed his appreciation that night in bed. On Thursday, the guys left after breakfast. As she hugged them and waved them off, Emily felt a tug of sadness. She was going to miss them. She spent the day feeling a little melancholy as she pottered around the house cleaning up after them and preparing for Simone. On the morning of Simone's visit, Emily and Jake got up early, both keen to get the day underway. Over breakfast, Jake was like a little kid who was antsy to go and play outside. "Look at you," she teased. "You can hardly sit still." He and David were starting their stints on the tractors. "Gotta go," he said, getting up with the last corner of his breakfast toast in his hand. He kissed her quickly. "I suppose I'd better bring your lunch down later then, since you don't look keen to wait for me to make it." Emily laughed. "Oh, sorry. Would you mind?" "Not at all. You go plough those fields, oh handsome man of mine," she said, slapping at his thigh as he passed by. "Don't you start," he replied, grinning back and pretending to bat her hand away. "But seriously, good luck. Call me if you need anything. I'll be right here," she said. "Speaking of barely able to sit still," Jake said. "I know. I can't wait to see Simone." "Me too. It's going to be great. Well, this crop isn't going to get planted on its own," he said, and left the kitchen with a wave of his hand. There was only around a week of solid work on her property, but timing was everything when it came to getting the seed in the ground. It was just a pity it was all happening when Simone was visiting. Meanwhile, the construction work would continue across the road. Jake had been astounded when the roofers had offered to work right through Easter. Emily was surprised to learn that they didn't need supervising. They had the plans, had already met with Jake on site, and so would just set to. After Jake left, Emily sat at the table with her coffee. Although she had often been alone in the house during the day while everyone else had been over at the building site, it suddenly seemed very quiet with no one around. Well, except for the chatter of all the neighbouring farmers on the UHF radio fixed to the wall above the bench. The whole district was abuzz with seeding. As much as she'd have liked to turn down the radio, she had to keep one ear open in case Jake called her. They could use mobile phones, but Jake wanted to use the radio for anything not too personal. That was what real farmers did. Just after 4 o'clock, Emily heard a car pull up outside. She looked out to see Simone getting out of a little white sedan. "Hi, Simone," she called, waving an arm as she raced down the path. "Welcome to Wattle Creek." "Thanks. It's wonderful to see you again," Simone said. "I'm so glad you could come, especially for Easter." They hugged like old friends. "And you must be Grace," Simone said to the dog beside them, bending down and patting her. "What a gorgeous girl. Jake's told me so much about you. Oh, yes, he has," she said, ruffling the dog's ears. "So you found us okay?" Emily asked, after Simone was again standing upright. "Piece of cake. Jake gives very precise directions." "Yes, that he does." "What a great spot," Simone said, slowly turning around to take in a full 360-degree view of her surroundings. "I love the big gum trees." "They are lovely. And thanks. It's home." "It's a lot greener than I thought it would be. It looked quite dry flying into Whyalla." "Yes, we've had quite a bit of rain down here. You might have noticed tractors out in some of the paddocks along the way. They're busy sowing the winter crops." "And is that the project back there?" she said, turning and pointing over towards the creek. "Yep. It's coming along really well. Much quicker than I thought it would. The guys work like demons." "They're hard workers and nice guys. Are they still here?" "No. They finished Wednesday and left yesterday." "That's a shame. I mean, a shame I didn't get to see them. But I bet you're glad to see the end of all that cooking." "They said they'd come back for a holiday sometime and do a stone wall for us if we want one," Emily said. "Pity you're not doing a B&B. They could be your first guests." "And do all their washing? I think I've learnt that lesson." Emily smiled. "Come on in. I'll give you the grand tour of the house. I'm leaving the cottage until tomorrow when hopefully we'll have a bit of roof on. I hope you don't mind." "Not at all. Anyway, I'm dying to see this office of yours. Jake's told me all about it. Says it's absolutely gorgeous," Simone said as they made their way up to the house. "I'm not sure it should be called that. I haven't done anything remotely office-related in there, and I don't have anywhere near your flair for interior decorating." "I'm sure you're selling yourself short," Simone said kindly. Emily shrugged. "Welcome," she said, throwing open the glass sliding door and allowing Simone to pass. "Oh, what a great space," Simone said. "It is, but it's just so big and open. I'd love to pick your brain about how I could improve it. Not that I have the time at the moment. I started on the office to give myself something to do, but then the cottage happened. And as they say, the rest is history," Emily added. "Some strategically placed dividers, even strips of fabric hanging from the ceiling, would make a big difference," Simone said, looking around. "I'll draw you a diagram so you know what I mean." "Okay, great, thanks. The bathroom and toilet are at the end," Emily said, pointing to her right. "Bit of a hike from your room, I'm afraid," she added apologetically. "No problem. I don't exactly have ensuite facilities myself, remember?" she replied, smiling broadly. Emily smiled back, remembering the long, thin Melbourne terrace. She felt like hugging Simone again. She was so nice. They made their way through the house, deliberately leaving her new office, Simone's room, until last. "Oh, wow, it's beautiful. Even more lovely than Jake described," Simone said when they were finally standing in the doorway. "You don't think the pink is too dark, honestly?" "No way, it's perfect. As you know, I'm quite partial to a bit of colour." "Yes, about that," Emily thought. She was desperate to discuss the possibility of Simone exhibiting. At the rate they were going, the gallery might be up and running before spring. If Simone agreed, she'd need time to get some paintings done, and she'd have to fit them in around her job. She really hoped Simone was still painting like a demon, as she'd said all those months ago. "I'm hoping to put tall bookshelves behind the chair in the corner, and I still haven't worked out what to do on the bed," Emily said with a shrug. "The cottage really has taken over. These things always take time.
Far too often I've rushed into buying something and it's ended up in a cupboard after a few months. I think you're better off living with a space for a while if you're not immediately sure. Well, that's what I'm doing, but not really by choice. I've hardly spent any time in here at all. Jake was telling me how busy you've been. I don't know how you do it. I struggle just to keep my house clean with working full-time, and I don't have a heap of blokes to cook and do washing for. I took on a cleaner a few weeks ago, and it's the best thing I've ever done. Wish I'd done it years ago. I wish I could, but there aren't any around here, Emily said. Maybe you need to set up a cleaning company.
Emily laughed heartily.
Sorry,
she said in response to Simone's puzzled look.
It's just that my dear friend Barbara and I had the same discussion the other day. So is Jake out playing farmer? Yep. He was very excited about it.
Emily checked her watch.
Well, he's been out there for about 8 hours. By now he's probably bored out of his brain with driving round and round only seeing dirt. I'm sure it's not nearly as glamorous or exciting as he was expecting, but he is helping David, so that's a good thing.
She explained that David and Jake had been swapping labour, both taking the opportunity to learn about the other's work.
I hear David and Barbara are great. I can't wait to meet them. Barbara's coming down for dinner tonight, but I'm afraid it might be just us girls. We're going to have a barbecue all together on Sunday, so you'll get to meet David then.
Back in the kitchen, Emily brought out her scrapbook and they settled in to discuss the finer details of the cottage.
It all looks fantastic,
Simone said.
And Jake tells me you're thinking of using it as an art gallery. How exciting. Yes.
Suddenly, Emily felt a little nervous.
Actually, I was hoping to talk to you about that. I'd like you to be my first artist to exhibit.
She blurted, her cheeks starting to redden.
Don't be silly. I'm not a real artist,
Simone said dismissively. Then, noticing Emily's slightly mortified expression,
Oh, you're being serious? Of course I am. I loved the paintings in your house, and I'm sure plenty of other people will too. They're gorgeous.
For a moment, Simone didn't reply.
I'm very flattered, she finally said. But they're just paint slapped on canvas. Now you're selling yourself short. That's what Jake once said,
Simone said thoughtfully.
Well, he can talk. I wanted him to exhibit his photography, but he flatly refuses. He's just very private. My reluctance is about lack of talent, not shyness, Simone said with a laugh. Since there's clearly no problem with lack of talent, can I count you in then?
Emily said cheerfully, and crossed her fingers in her lap under the table.
Come on, Simone, please. I need an artist for the opening, and I really want it to be you. Flattery, flattery. So you'll do it?
Emily prodded.
Before I decide, how long do I have and just how many paintings do you think you'll need?
They discussed the details, and Emily watched as Simone became more and more enthusiastic. She said she'd actually done quite a few canvases since being inspired to pick up her brushes again after Emily's visit. She'd even done some landscapes, abstracts, and experimented with architecture like Jake had with his photography. She explained she'd once had aspirations to live as an artist, but didn't like the poor, struggling part that seemed to go hand in hand with such an existence. Perhaps this was a sign, the break she needed.
All right, I'll do it,
she said, and leapt up and hugged Emily, thanking her for the opportunity.
But I'm not sure when I'll get the time to paint.
They were still talking it over and chatting animatedly about styles, colours and textures when Barbara arrived.
Guess what?
Emily said after the introductions had been made. Barbara was settled in a chair and there were fresh cups of tea in front of each of them.
What?
Barbara asked.
I've got my very first artist signed up. Well, not literally signed.
She opened her arms to indicate Simone.
Oh, that's fantastic, Barbara said.
May it open a whole world of opportunities for you, Simone, and mark the start of a successful venture for you, Emily.
I'll drink to that,
Simone said, and they all raised their mugs and tapped them together to complete the toast. Hey, I drove by to look at the cottage before coming in. I can't believe how much they've done on the roof already, Barbara said. It looks like most of the beams are up. They're going to be here all weekend. I couldn't believe it when I heard they wanted to work over Easter. Neither could Jake, Emily said. Probably the fishing forecast wasn't good, or there'll be too many tourists out on the water or something. The owner of the business is a keen fisherman, Barbara explained to Simone. Lucky for us, Emily said. There were heaps of vehicles towing boats all the way from Whyalla, Simone added, taking a sip of her tea. Well, I'm just happy the show goes on while David and Jake are off doing other things. Indeed. How's Jake going out there all on his lonesome? Barbara asked. Fine, I think. Haven't heard a peep since I took his lunch down earlier. He really is having a ball. I think being in charge of heavy machinery is good for his masculinity, Emily said with a laugh. How's David going? Trundling along. Not a peep there either. So do you want to go for a few laps with Jake? Emily suddenly asked Simone. Oh, yes, please. That'd be fun. Come on then, we'll take him down some cake, Emily said, grabbing the cling-wrapped bundle she'd placed on the bench that morning. Should I take a jacket or something? Simone asked. It wouldn't hurt, but you should be in a nice warm cab. I'll get it from my room just in case, she said, leaping up and disappearing from the kitchen. She's lovely, Barbara whispered. Yes, isn't she? Emily replied, also keeping her voice low. Though of course I knew she would be, being Jake's sister. It's so good to be spending time getting to know each other properly, and I'm so relieved she's agreed to be my artist, Emily said. That's a huge weight off my mind. Well, everything sure is coming together. It's great to hear, Barbara said. Speaking of coming together, how are you and the little one doing? So far, so good. I'm doing my best not to worry, but it's hard. I'm meant to be in the safe period now, and I know I'm just being paranoid, but I'm still on tenterhooks. I'll probably be a nervous wreck by September. You're going to be just fine, Emily said, patting her friend's hand. She thought Barbara's overall appearance did have a slightly drawn look to it. I'm taking a camera too, Simone said, reappearing. I just have to get some shots of Jake with his tractor. Good idea, Emily said, smiling and thinking how alike she and Jake were. Right from the start of the cottage project, he had recorded every bit of progress with his camera. Come on then. Do you mind if I stay here? Barbara asked. Seen one tractor, seen them all. No problem at all, Emily said. I won't be long, and there are plenty of magazines in the usual place. She called Gracie to her and pulled the glass door shut. It was a lovely, warm, still afternoon. Barbara's not her usual self, Emily explained to Simone as they made their way down to the paddock where Jake was working. She's pregnant, but she's had 2 miscarriages before, so she's really worried about it happening again. She hoped Barbara wouldn't mind her telling Simone, but thought it important she knew. Oh, the poor thing, Simone said. No wonder she's being super careful. I'm sure I'd be a nervous wreck. It's amazing. You hear of all these people, especially teenagers, getting pregnant at the drop of a hat and all the lectures at school about safe sex, but it seems it's actually quite difficult to get pregnant when you really want to. Not that I know anything about it. No, me neither. As they walked, the shadows were growing long, signalling that dusk was on its way. They fell silent for a moment until Simone cried, There he is! In the distance, a green John Deere tractor was making its way slowly along the far side of the paddock, the soil changing colour to a rich shade of brown behind it. So what exactly is he doing? Simone asked. Seeding. Sowing the seeds for a wheat crop. Oh, don't they dig it up first? I'm just thinking of how normal gardening is done. You dig everything up and then plant the seeds. They used to do that. Now they do what's called direct drilling, digging the soil and planting the seed in the one go. It keeps the nutrients in or something. I'm not the one to ask. I was raised in a town, not on a farm, so
I don't know a whole lot more than you. My husband wasn't one for sharing. Oh, well, at least you have Jake now. He's one of the most generous and kind people I've ever met, though I might be a little biased, Simone added, grinning. I love him, Emily said blissfully as she brought the ute to a halt at the paddock gate. I know you do, and he loves you, Simone said. They got out and walked over to where a small truck was parked nearby. Emily explained that the large divided bin on the back contained the seed and fertilizer for refilling the hoppers on the machine behind. John used to have all sorts of trouble with the auger motor, she said, remembering how he'd regularly cursed the machine. Hopefully it hadn't been giving Jake any trouble. No news is good news, she thought, quoting another of Gran's favourite sayings. We'll wait here for him to come around. It's not a good idea to drive over what's just been sown. He should only be a few minutes. They silently watched, mesmerised by the slow, steady progress of the tractor, moving around the paddock in front of them. It took around 10 minutes for Jake to pull up nearby and the loud, throaty engine to reduce to a gentle, idling hum. He stepped down from the high cab and strode across the paddock towards them. Hey, you, he said, greeting his sister with a tight hug. Having fun playing farmer? Simone said. I will have you know I am being a farmer, not just playing at it, he said, pouting. So how's it going? Good. No problems. Touch wood, he added, putting his hand on his head. It's just time-consuming. Listening to talkback or music on the radio isn't a bad way to spend a day. So, who's coming for a lap or two? I can't fit both of you in, though, he said. Simone's turn, Emily said. Barbara's waiting for me back at the house. Okay. Come on, sis. We've got a crop to sow. Are you going to finish this paddock before tea, do you think? Emily asked. Should do, if it's not until around 7, he said, looking at her questioningly. Do you want to be out here that long, Simone? I don't know. Do I? She asked Jake. She'll be fine. If I am, she will be, he said. Well, if you do get sick of it, get him to call me up on the UHF and I'll come and get you, Emily said. Oh, and here's some cake to tide you over, she said, handing over 4 pieces of cake wrapped tightly in cling film. You're wonderful, thank you, Jake said, wrapping his arms around her. My pleasure, Emily said, smiling up at him. Simone and Jake walked across to the tractor and then got settled up in the cab. Emily watched as the tractor moved off with a puff of thick black smoke from its exhaust. After waving them off, she got back into the ute with Grace, feeling happy and content. Everything sure was coming together and coming together well. Life was pretty damned perfect. It would be nice to sit with Barbara for a while. She'd missed that during the last few busy months. Chapter 26. Even though it was Jake's birthday, Easter Saturday was a work day for the farmers. That morning they all got up early for a quick breakfast together before he set out on the tractor. Emily held her breath as he opened the present she'd agonised over. Oh, wow, Em, this is great, he said, getting up and kissing her. After much deliberation, she'd ordered him a brown Bushman dry-as-a-bone oilskin jacket and fawn Stockman-style Akubra hat. She'd consulted Barbara and David to make sure she got traditional enough styles so that he would blend in with the locals. Hopefully I'll look less like the bloke visiting from the city now, he said, putting on both items and doing a 360 in front of the girls. Maybe when you've worn them a bit and been in some dust, Simone said. Well, there's no way I'm rubbing dust into my hat if that's what you're suggesting, Jake said indignantly, taking off the hat and stroking it protectively. Don't worry, I'm sure you'll look less clean and shiny in no time, Emily said. This is from me, said Simone, dragging a navy and white striped parcel from the floor onto the table. Happy birthday, brother dear. She leaned over and gave him a peck on the cheek.
Thanks, sis. He tore off the paper to reveal a nice thick woolen jumper in steel grey, a checked shirt, and 2 paperback novels. Brilliant. Well, I'd better go and get some real dirt on my new jacket and hat, he said, getting up from the table with a huge grin. He kissed Emily on his way past. See you later, he said, doffing his hat at the door as he left the kitchen. Have fun, Simone and Emily called. Emily and Simone rugged up and headed off for a long walk soon after. They started with a tour of the new building, spending almost half an hour discussing upcoming fixtures and fittings. It was an amazing feeling to stand underneath the timber roof trusses and imagine the finished building. Looking down at her feet, she couldn't wait to see how the concrete floor came up when polished. Even with all the dust on it, she could see small, colourful stones glinting where the sun shone through the window openings. They chewed over ideas for seating in the large rooms. Simone was right. Large, flat ottomans where people could sit and look at one wall and then swivel around to look at the next was a much better idea than couches with backs. It was the sort of thing all the government-owned galleries had. The tricky thing would be deciding the size, shape and fabric. Leather would be hard-wearing, but would probably require quite a large outlay. I love leather, but you don't want to look too conservative and old-fashioned, Simone said thoughtfully, especially when it's going to be called the button jar. That makes me think fun, vibrant, colourful, eclectic. That's what I'm going for, Emily said, pleased the meaning behind it was so obvious. So you don't want it looking like a state or national gallery, Simone continued. No, I don't really. Don't worry, we'll come up with the perfect thing. When Simone suggested bright Indian fabrics like those used for saris, Emily almost froze to the spot. There was India again. Had Jake employed Simone to convince her to change her mind about their honeymoon? No, get a grip. They hadn't even seriously discussed going to India. It had been suggested as a place to visit, just like she'd suggested Tasmania. Simone didn't even know about their engagement yet. No, she was being silly and paranoid. Though she did let out a sigh of relief when Simone added that there were some places in Melbourne importing the gorgeous fabrics. And they are gorgeous, Emily thought. The only problem was how hard-wearing would they be? She liked the idea of brightening the space they had deliberately left neutral. Though, would Simone's bright paintings be overshadowed by brocades in even richer colours? Gosh, there was still so much to think about. Of course, she mightn't always have bright artworks in here, but her priority was for everything to look perfect on opening night. If she went for fabric, she could always have a selection with zips so they could be changed. She could get out her sewing machine and make some herself once she had one to cut a pattern from. As they left the unfinished building, the roofers were driving in off the road towards it. Emily and Simone waved in greeting but kept walking in the opposite direction. Come on, I want to see sheep and kangaroos in their natural habitat, Simone said, linking her arm through Emily's. If we have a good walk, I won't feel guilty about all the chocolate eggs I'm going to eat tomorrow. I can't guarantee you'll see kangaroos, but I'll do my best, Emily said with a laugh. She took them towards a secluded area where she'd seen a mob of kangaroos hanging out a few weeks ago. The perfect, lush spot she'd first taken Jake to was a little far to walk. They'd try there tomorrow if they didn't see any roos here today. They silently crept the last 50 metres and stopped amongst the trees, hidden. Just ahead of them, beyond the edge of the scrub, a dozen kangaroos of varying sizes were grazing. Emily bent down to hold Grace's collar. Stay, she said quietly in the dog's ear. Oh, they're beautiful, Simone whispered, clearly in awe. Her voice was low, but at that moment all the kangaroos lifted their heads in their direction. And then, in one fluid movement like a grey blanket being caught up in a gust of wind, they turned and bounded off into the security of the trees on the far side. Sorry, Simone said. I thought I was being quiet. No matter how quiet we were, they would still have noticed us. They probably smelt us well before they heard us. They have amazing senses.
It's pretty late for their morning feeding, so they were probably ready to head off anyway. They usually come back around dusk. Well, I'm so glad I've seen them. I think it's great you living in harmony with them and not getting out the gun, Simone said, walking out into the open area the kangaroos had just vacated. Emily laughed. Well, it's not quite harmonious, but the years of drought have kept their numbers down naturally. Hopefully we won't need to cull any for a while yet. I hate the thought of it, but in large numbers they make a horrible mess of crops. Leaving the area, they did a large loop that took them way up behind the new building. The whole time, the faint background hum of Jake's tractor could be heard. So Jake's looking well. Certainly much better than last time I saw him. Is he better, or is it just being out in the sun and fresh country air? You'll have to ask him how he's feeling. Yes, but you must have some idea. Has he shaken the adrenal fatigue, do you think? It's hard to tell, really. It seems to be one of those illnesses that has a lot of symptoms you could put down to other things. Like, take his hands shaking. My hands were shaking when I spent all that time with a hammer cleaning up the rocks. I worry constantly that he's overdoing it, but I can't nag him. He's a grown man, and you know what men are like. Unless it's man flu and they're snivelling and moaning in pain, no one knows about it. I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be putting you on the spot. I'll talk to him. It's okay, Emily said in a gentler tone. And I don't mean to sound evasive. He hasn't had night sweats for ages and he hasn't really struggled to get up in the morning since the project started, if that helps. But I don't know if that means he's over the illness or just that he loves being in charge. Perhaps it's being away from city life, tough clients and big projects that's done it. I don't know, but he has certainly been in his element with this one. He hasn't seemed at all stressed or strung out. God, he's hot when he's in charge, Emily mused, then realised she'd said the words out loud. Sorry, that was a little off of me. Simone laughed. He's my brother, so I can't say I find him hot, but he is pretty impressive when he's in charge. And I'm sure being in love has helped, she added, linking her arm through Emily's again. Emily smiled back in response. They walked across a small ridge of hills and finally caught sight of Jake's tractor 3 paddocks over, turning the earth from the grey of old, dried summer grass and leftover cereal crop stalks to rich, dark brown. Emily's bright blue ute shone in the sun at the gate beside the little old truck. It's all just so right, she thought, smiling contentedly to herself. At 11 o'clock Sunday morning, after a bit of a lie-in and a breakfast of hot cross buns, Jake, Emily and Simone piled into the new ute and headed off for the barbecue. As they arrived at Barbara and David's favourite picnic spot, a secluded oasis tucked away at the back of their farm, hidden by scrub, Simone cried out in awe. "It's gorgeous," she said. "Like a postcard." She got her camera out and started snapping away. Thanks to the recent rains, it was looking more lush and beautiful than the last time Emily had been there. David and Barbara were unpacking their ute when they pulled up. David had laid down a tarp and secured it at the corners with tent pegs and was now spreading picnic rugs over the top. "Happy Easter," they all cried, and went through the ritual of everyone hugging and kissing. Jake introduced David and Simone, and then David took orders for drinks. "I'm on the sparkling apple cider," Barbara said. "If anyone would like to join me. No additives, just pure juice with bubbles from Tasmania." "Oh, yes, please," Simone said. "Yes, me too, thanks," Emily said. "Looks like I've got 2 designated drivers," Jake said. "And I've got Barb," David said. "We could get hammered, mate." "You're on your own there. I'm way too old for that sort of caper," Jake said. "Yeah, me too, really. So, just a light beer then?" "Yes, thanks," Jake replied. When they each had a drink in hand, David welcomed Simone and toasted. "To good friends." They clinked glasses, murmured their agreement, and took their first sips. As soon as she tasted the sparkling non-alcoholic cider, Emily thought she might never go back to the alcoholic version. She liked the gentler, sweeter sensation of it on her tongue. "This is lovely. I must get some," she said, studying the bottle. During a quick trip to town the day before, where Simone had been stunned to find the shops shut at noon, Emily had bought a loaf of squishy white bread and a few standard sausages from the local butcher. These items were their homage to basic, old-fashioned barbecuing amongst an otherwise quite gourmet selection. Barbara had brought marinated skinless and boneless chicken thighs, rissoles, and grilled pumpkin, zucchini, capsicum, and potato. After the salads, plates, cutlery, serviettes, and condiments were set up on the table, the girls took their place on the rugs with their backs to the sun. Meanwhile, David and Jake got to work on the portable gas barbecue. "Thank you so much," Simone said. "This is perfect. What a great way to spend a Sunday, let alone Easter Sunday."
"Thank goodness the boys took some time off," Barbara said.
"Yes, plenty seemed to be still at it," Emily said, cocking an ear. The hum of tractors could be heard droning away on nearby farms. After lunch, they sat around nursing their full stomachs.
"I'm eating for 2, Barbara announced, "and I still think I've eaten too much."
"As long as you've left room for Easter eggs," Emily said. "We've got stacks of them." She got up and retrieved the chocolate eggs from the esky.
"Before you dish them out," Jake said, getting up, "I've got something to say."
"Oh, okay," Emily said, surprised, and sat back down with the bag beside her.
"As you all know," Jake began, addressing the small group, "it's been a few months since I came here to Wattle Creek, and in that time I've become very settled with them. What most of you don't know is that around 3 months ago, I proposed."
Emily blushed. She looked at the ground with no idea why she was feeling embarrassed. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed David and Barbara's bug-eyed, open-mouthed expressions, but Simone didn't look at all surprised.
"I made a hash of it, really, blurting it out when the timing was all wrong," Jake continued. "But now, if you'll still have me, Em, I'd like to make it right."
Suddenly he was on his knees in front of her. He took her hands in his and looked deep into her blue-grey eyes.
"Emily Catherine Oliphant, will you do me the honour of becoming my wife?"
Unable to speak, Emily nodded. Tears blurred her vision as Jake reached into his pocket. She blinked them away as he brought out a small, square velvet box and then opened it in front of her. She focused on a large diamond sparkling in the sun. She put her hands to her throat.
"Oh, my God. It's huge."
"Oh, wow, it's gorgeous!" Barbara cried, speaking the exact words Emily hadn't yet got out.
"So, do I get a yes? Again?"
Jake asked, grinning. Emily nodded furiously. "Yes, yes, yes!" she finally blurted and threw her arms around him. They fell back entwined. The ring box snapped shut, still firmly in Jake's grasp. "Pity I can't drink champagne," Barbara said wistfully as she watched them kiss.
"Oh, come on, get a room, you two,"
David said after a few moments. Jake and Emily sat up, grinning from ear to ear.
"But seriously, congratulations. You make a lovely couple," he added.
He leaned over and hugged Emily and then shook hands with Jake before pulling him into a manly hug and slapping him on the back. "Yes, congratulations," Barbara said, hugging first Emily and then Jake. "And from me, of course," Simone said. "I helped choose the ring, so it goes without saying that I totally approve." She smiled and leaned in to kiss them both. "Now," she said, clapping her hands together, "it must be time to bring out the chocolate." She reached across, took an egg, and passed the bag to Barbara. "More for us if they're too busy," she added, nodding at Jake and Emily, who were once again entwined.
"Not so fast," Jake said, sitting up.
He intercepted the bag just before it was handed to David.
"Oi!" said David, pouting. "We're newly engaged. We should get priority," Jake said. "Not until she has your ring on her finger, you're not, mate, not officially," David replied.
As Jake slipped the simple, elegant ring over her finger, Emily stared at the massive, clear, round solitaire diamond.
"I hope you like it," he said quietly. "But if you don't, it can easily be changed."
"No, I love it. It's perfect." It was the largest diamond she'd ever seen up close in a ring, but it was in a style that didn't sit too high and would be practical enough to wear every day. She made a silent vow to never take it off. "I'm so glad you like it," Simone said when they'd settled into the Easter eggs. So Simone had been involved. Well, of course she had to have been. Perhaps this was the whole reason for her visit. She was so pleased she was there. Emily looked around at the group of people who meant the most to both her and Jake. The only ones missing were Des and Gran. She was a little sad about that. And her mother too, but knowing Enid, she'd probably have said something to ruin the moment. Her eyes kept moving back to admire her ring.
"Yeah, give us a look now it's on,"
David urged, and Emily held out her hand and wiggled it in front of them. The diamond glinted magnificently in the sun, sending tiny, brightly coloured rainbows across the picnic rug. "So, when are you going to get married?" Barbara asked, when the commotion of oohs and ahs had finally died down. Emily looked at Jake and shrugged.
"Better give Enid enough time to put together the full catastrophe," Barbara said quietly.
Emily was surprised by her friend's lack of animation. Where was the smirk? Probably no one else would have noticed, but she did. Barbara was usually the life of the party and had been known to be merciless with her sarcasm. "Oh, God, don't remind me," Emily said, pushing her concern aside and making an exaggerated show of putting her head in her hands. Barbara did have a point, though. She'd have to try to stop her mother bolting off to book visits to bridal-wear shops, florists and bakeries in Adelaide. She and Barbara had discussed their weddings a few times, and there was one thing she knew for sure. This time she did not want Enid involved at all. "Speaking of which, I'd better call Mum and Dad," Emily said, and got her mobile out, stood up, and moved away from the group. "Hi, Dad. Happy Easter," she said. "How's things?"
"And a happy Easter to you too. Anything out of the ordinary happening that I should know about?" Des Oliphant inquired. "Like perhaps an exciting announcement?"
"You already know." Emily looked back at Jake, who grinned at her and raised his eyebrows knowingly.
"Jake might have mentioned something. I hope you said yes."
"He actually asked your permission?" Emily asked, fixing her gaze on Jake, who now shrugged, looking proud of himself.
"Very good manners, that young man. I believe he'll be very good to you and very good for you. I wouldn't have given my blessing if I didn't think so."
"Thanks, Dad." Tears filled Emily's eyes again, and a lump worked its way into her throat. Just as Emily was about to ask to speak to her mother, there was a commotion in the background at her father's end. She heard the muffled words, "What's going on? What blessing? Is that Emily? Here, give me the phone. Emily, what's going on?" Enid Oliphant's shrill voice boomed into her ear. "Happy Easter, Mum." "Yes, happy Easter," she said brusquely. "Now, what's going on? What's this about Des giving his blessing? For what? And why aren't I being consulted?" "Jake has asked me to marry him. We're engaged," Emily said quietly when Enid's rant finally ended. "What? Oh, but you hardly know him. It's a bit soon, isn't it?" "We don't think so." You could at least be pleased for me.
I am. Of course I am pleased for you. Congratulations, both of you. I'm sure you will be very happy together.
Thanks, Mum.
The next thing she heard was Enid berating her husband. You knew about this, Des, and didn't tell me. How long have you known? Emily rolled her eyes and sighed. As usual, her mother had managed to make it all about her. I'd like to speak to Jake, please, Enid said suddenly. Emily moved back towards the picnic rug.
Mum wants to speak to you,
she said, and handed the phone over with pursed lips before sitting back down heavily. Hello, Enid. Thank you, we're very happy. I hope you approve. Emily wished he'd put it on speaker so they could all hear. No, we haven't set a date yet. This is all very new. We haven't discussed any plans. He looked at Emily and winced. We're not in any rush. When we've decided what we want to do, you'll be the first to know. But it will probably be something low-key. No, you're right, I haven't been married before, but I'm not a big one for white weddings. As I said, we haven't discussed the actual ceremony as yet. Look, I'm sorry, Enid, this phone is going flat. I'm going to have to go. It's probably going to cut out any second. I'll have Emily phone you back later. And with that, he ended the call and dropped the phone onto the rug like a hot potato. Phew, he said, and let out his breath loudly. Well handled, mate, David said. There were ripples of agreement from around the group. Simone frowned. Emily's mother can be somewhat, interfering, Barbara explained, and not generally very supportive. That's putting it politely, David said. Ah, Simone said knowingly and nodded. So it sometimes calls for affirmative action to protect our dear Emily from her clutches, Jake said. Chapter 27. In the ute on the way home, Emily still couldn't take her eyes off her ring. What a surprise, she thought, twirling it around on her finger. Not one mention of their engagement in almost 3 months, and then bang! You like it, don't you? Jake asked, putting his hand on her thigh. Because if you don't... Emily grasped his hand. It's perfect, and I love it, she said, beaming across at him. She almost added, perfect like you, like us, but stopped herself. This scene, them sitting in the front of the ute, Simone in the back, was too much like a scene out of a low-budget movie as it was without adding soppy dialogue as well. What a wonderful day, she thought, again looking back down at her ring. She wondered what it would take to convince Enid she was not having another big wedding. There was no way she wanted to go through that palaver again. Then again, maybe it would be easier just to give in. She could leave all the preparations to her mother and just turn up on the day. No way. I'm better than that. Look how I've been standing up for myself lately. It was hard work keeping the defences up, but the peace was worth it. And there was Jake to think about now, too. She knew she'd have to phone her mother back, but she decided to sleep on it. In the morning she would be stronger and more tolerant. Right now she wanted to let the joy of her engagement sink in. She settled back into the seat and let out a deep sigh. I hope that's a sigh of contentment, darling, Jake said. Of course it is, she said, turning towards him and smiling warmly. I've never properly asked you, Em, Jake said. But what do you want? Would you like a big white wedding, a smaller, more casual affair, or to go away, just the two of us? What would you like to do? Emily felt a little uncomfortable having this conversation with Simone in the vehicle with them. I'm not sure, but I certainly don't want the full shebang. I'd feel like such a hypocrite doing that all over again when I didn't get it right the first time. I'm sure you made a beautiful bride, Jake said kindly. It wasn't your fault you married the wrong bloke. Whose fault was it then? It wasn't like I was dragged down the aisle kicking and screaming.
Your mum didn't sound all that happy about the engagement. Doesn't she like Jake? Simone asked. No, she thinks he's lovely. Well, she did the first few times they met. I think she blames him for what she would see as my sudden willfulness. You see, I finally started standing up for myself after a lifetime of accepting her control, interference, and lack of support, she explained to Simone. I'm 32 and my mother still thinks she can run my life. I'm finally trying to throw the shackles off. I think eloping to somewhere exotic would be perfect, Simone said wistfully. Honestly, I've got too much else taking up space in my head to even think about it right now.
Yes, one thing at a time, I think, Jake said. Like remembering to phone Enid back, he added, shooting her a grimace. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't have hung up on her.
Forget it. I'll deal with it tomorrow when my head is clear and my defences can withstand her.
They got back just as the last light was fading. Emily was pleased she'd thought ahead and left the outside light on. They were weary but content. She couldn't remember when she'd last spent a day without all her attention on the building project or under pressure in the kitchen. After unpacking everything, Jake and Emily retreated to the lounge to watch some television, which they hadn't done for ages, while Simone packed so she would be ready to leave early in the morning. Emily would be sad to see her go. She had been wonderful company while Jake had been off planting the crop, and Emily hated goodbyes of any sort. Sometimes she wondered if this little twinge she felt whenever she and Jake said goodbye, even for the shortest time, was fear that what she had found was too good to be true and that it was all about to be taken away. She had to work hard to force the negative thoughts away. She was so lucky to be where she was now, and she'd been doing so well at being positive. If only she could just focus on the good all of the time and not let the insecurities seep back in. Barbara had told her more than once that if you thought too much about what you feared happening, it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. In recent times, Emily had often wanted to say something similar to Barbara regarding her fear over losing the baby, but had never found the right way to say it. She didn't want to sound like she was throwing Barbara's philosophical beliefs in her face, but she couldn't help thinking that if Barbara just got on with life, instead of fretting about doing the tiniest thing in case it might harm the baby, she would be better off. But really, what would I know? What she did know was that she was neglecting their friendship because of the cottage project. She knew Barbara didn't resent her for it, but perhaps if they could hang out together more, her friend might be in a better place psychologically and emotionally. It was even worse now that seeding had started and David was spending most of his time off in the paddock, leaving Barbara home alone with her fears. Even though Emily wasn't religious, she did still sort of pray. Well, raised her eyes skyward and silently begged the atmosphere around her to give Barbara a healthy baby and return her well-adjusted, laid-back friend to her. She knew a baby would change everything, but she just hoped Barbara would return to trusting the universe to do its thing. "All packed and ready to go," Simone announced, entering the lounge and throwing herself onto the vacant couch. "I'm going to miss you," Emily said. "It's gone far too quickly, but it's been so good to have you stay, and to get to know you a bit better." "Me too. But we've got lots of time to get to know each other now we're going to be related," Simone said, beaming. "I'm so happy for you guys. Anyway, I'd better get back home and get busy on the paintings," she continued. "I wonder if the boss would let me take a month off to play artist like he's playing farmer," she said, raising her eyebrows in question at Jake. "How many times do I have to tell you to? Tractor driving is not playing. And anyway, I'm still running the project while I'm doing it. I'm multitasking like you women are always on about. It's actually not so hard," he added with a challenging grin. "But seriously, Sim, do you want some time off to paint?" he asked. I wouldn't mind, actually, Simone said a little coyly. Well, you've got plenty of leave owing. But you're not there. But Angus is. Antoniette. It's JKL and Associates, remember? You keep telling me not to worry, that everything is going along fine without me, and that Andrew is proving a great asset. Winter is coming and the Hanson job has had the plug pulled, so it's quiet anyway. The other guys can run the place and focus on looking for new work while you take a month off. Are you sure? Of course. As if I'm going to shackle you to the place if you don't want to be there. I don't want my best employee and business partner getting so jack of it all she ups and leaves me permanently. What if my paintings sell like Emily's jam and I become a famous artist overnight? Simone said, waving her arms theatrically. Well, we'll discuss how we're going to move forward then. You're pretty safe. It's not as if that's likely, Simone said. How many times do I have to tell you to stop selling yourself short? Your paintings would look right at home in plenty of the galleries I've visited, Jake said emphatically. Emily chimed in. Jake's right, Simone. I loved the paintings in your house, and I bet plenty of other people will too once they get to see them. Well, you're both very kind, Simone said. So, take a month off and enjoy your painting, Jake said. End of discussion. I'll phone Angus on Tuesday morning. Anyway, we don't want you working so hard you end up a basket case like I almost did, Jake said. You seem good now, so if that's what getting out of the office does for the psyche, sign me up, Simone said. That and good country cooking, fresh air, and the love and attention of a good woman, Jake said, putting his arm around Emily and pulling her towards him. I will be forever grateful for you calling Emily that day, Sim, he continued. So consider this the first step in repaying you. You don't owe me anything, Jake. You're my big brother and I love you. She leant over and kissed him on the cheek. Watching this exchange made Emily sad about being an only child, but at least gaining a sister-in-law was better than nothing. The flickering television was ignored as the three of them sat up chatting about the next stage of the build and the fit-out before saying an early good night and heading off to their rooms just before 9. Are you okay? Jake said when he and Emily were snuggling in bed. You seem a bit down. Maybe just a bit tired. It's been a big day. Yes, sorry about that. It's my fault, springing the ring and second proposal on you. Don't be sorry. It was lovely. Are you sure you're okay? I am a bit worried about Barbara, Emily said. I'm not sure what to do. Yes, she was very quiet today. Just then the home phone rang beside Jake. Emily checked her watch. Right on 9. She didn't like to answer the phone after 9 o'clock. It was how she'd been raised. Do you want me to answer it? Jake asked. It might be important. Yes, thanks. Hello, Jake speaking. He listened, mouthed, "It's your mother," and then pressed the button to activate the speaker. Hello again, Enid. What can I do for you? Emily hasn't phoned me back. You said she would. She'll call you tomorrow. We've just got home after a long day out and we're really quite tired. Oh, where have you been? Jake shot stricken, raised eyebrows at Emily. She felt the urge to say, none of your damned business. But he was too well-mannered, so he did what she always did and conceded details. We've been out for a picnic barbecue with Barbara and David Burton. My sister Simone is visiting from Melbourne for the weekend. She's leaving first thing in the morning, so we've got a very early start. Hint, hint. But Enid never seemed to get hints, and tonight was no exception. Oh, well, I'm very disappointed not to have had the opportunity to meet her. You could have all had lunch here with us. It would have been nice to spend at least some part of the holiday weekend with my daughter. I haven't seen her for ages, said Enid indignantly. Jake pursed his lips and stared at Emily whilst slowly shaking his head. And there it is, Emily thought. The guilt trip. She's blaming Jake for me not visiting. We've been very busy with the building project, and it hasn't been that long since we've seen you, Jake said calmly.
Oh, did you go ahead with that?
Well, yes, we did tell you that. Quite some time ago, Jake said into the phone whilst frowning bewilderedly at Emily and shaking his head. You were at the bloody launch party. And where do you think Dad's been spending all his time these last few months? Has Alzheimer's set in? Like Gran? Do I need to talk to Dad about getting her assessed? She bit her lip.
Well, I still think it's a silly idea,
Enid said in her perfected holier-than-thou tone. Jake was becoming exasperated. With all due respect, Enid, it really makes no difference whether you approve or not. Now, if there wasn't anything else...
I'd like to speak to Emily. I need to discuss the wedding arrangements.
Enid, Emily and I are not even sure we want a wedding as such. Look, could we do this another time? We have an early start in the morning, as I've already said.
You can't not have a wedding,
Enid said, clearly aghast. The words, "what would people think," remained unsaid, but Emily knew they were on the tip of her mother's tongue. They always were. We will celebrate our wedding as we wish. Enid, we only became engaged today and really haven't had a chance to discuss it as yet, Jake said. Emily was impressed with his patience.
Put Emily on, will you please?
Jake raised his eyebrows in question. Emily reached out for the phone.
Mum, it's Emily. What's the problem?
You didn't call me back.
Oh, God, here we go, right back at the start. She took a deep, calming breath and silently counted to 5.
I haven't had a chance yet, she said with a deep sigh. I was going to phone you in the morning. I've had a long day and I'm very tired.
She almost added, what with getting engaged and all? But there was no point. Enid would still find a way to bring everything back to her.
You can't be serious about not having a wedding.
Actually, we're very serious about it, Mum. And honestly, we've got enough going on with the gallery right now.
Gallery? What gallery?
The building? It's going to be a gallery.
As in an art gallery?
Yes.
Whatever do you know about art?
I know what I like,
Emily said boldly.
Oh, for goodness sake, Emily.
This had always been Enid's fallback line when she disagreed with something but didn't quite know what to say next.
Mum, I'm having the courage to take a risk and do something with my life. I have Jake's full support, and Dad's. It would be nice to have yours.
For once.
Now, if you don't mind, we have an early start tomorrow and a very busy day ahead and need an early night.
Oh, right. Well, of course I'm supportive, Emily,
Enid said indignantly.
Good night, Mum,
Emily said, and hung up without waiting for further comment from the other end of the line. She flopped back onto her pillow, feeling considerably more exhausted than before the call. She really is something else, isn't she? Jake muttered. I don't think she'd approve of anything that wasn't her idea.
Probably not,
Emily said absently while raiding her memory. She came up empty. Chapter 28. The next morning they saw Simone off at 7 o'clock. Then Jake left for another day on the tractor, along with Grace, who had taken to riding around with him. It would be his final day sowing on their property. Tomorrow, all going well, David would be moving the tractor and equipment up to his much larger farm. It was a major production that involved utes with flashing orange lights driving ahead to warn oncoming traffic that large machinery was coming along the road. Barbara and Emily would be needed to provide taxi and escort services back and forth.
Once they moved farms, Emily would hardly see Jake for weeks. He'd come in late, sleep, and leave early the next morning. Everything depended on getting the crop sown as quickly as possible. Sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, Emily felt tired to the point of queasiness. She looked down into the coffee she'd lost all interest in. Her mouth tasted weird, sort of metallic. She got up and went to the sink and emptied the mug. She considered phoning Barbara to see if she wanted some company, but they'd spent most of yesterday together. She then thought about going back to bed. She was actually starting to feel quite unwell. No, she'd go out and check on the orange tree growing in the back corner of the house yard. Maybe make a batch of marmalade. That might make her feel better. She'd been working so hard for so long, taking care of everyone and being involved with the project, she needed to take a day out and do something for herself. Emily retrieved her stack of buckets from the laundry and then checked on her stash of jars. Thankfully, John hadn't disposed of them. She hoped the oranges were ripe and hadn't gone rotten. She hadn't been around that side of the house in months. There was never any need to. She was in luck. The lone tree surrounded by bare earth was full. It was the one fruit John had liked, and she'd planted it for him to celebrate their engagement. They had discussed planting a veggie patch here as well, but had never got around to it. She picked up the few oranges that had fallen to the ground. Her heart and mood brightened at the prospect of a fun day in the kitchen, just cooking for herself and feeling close to Gran. It would be nice to have enough to send a box to Simone's friend Billy, who had the produce store, and to sell in the gallery when it opened. It took them all day Tuesday to move the machinery to David and Barbara's farm, and the whole time Emily continued to feel a little off. A dull, nagging nausea always seemed to lurk below the surface, flaring up every now and then. She was sure that if she threw up, she'd feel much better. But as close as she got, she never seemed to cross that particular line. Whatever it was hadn't turned into a cold or the flu. If she rested and kept eating well, hopefully she would keep whatever was ailing her at bay. That evening, after poached eggs on toast for dinner, they went to bed early and sat up discussing progress on the cottage project. Emily would have preferred to just go to sleep or at least snuggle silently. But Jake was keen to chatter about the building, which now had a completed roof and protection from the rain. The doors and windows will go in the next few days, and then the building will be lockable. A major milestone, he declared.
Yes, it looks almost finished from over here now the roof is on,
said Emily, struggling to focus on the discussion. Still quite a bit to do, but it'll be great to have it at lockup, especially since I'll be away at David's for a while.
Yes, perfect timing.
It's going like clockwork all round, Jake said proudly. Thank goodness everyone has been available when we needed them.
Yes, we certainly do seem to have luck on our side.
And you deserve no less. Once it's weathertight, the concrete can get polished, and then we're ready for the cabinetry to go in and the tiling to be done. Then the major heavy work inside will be complete.
Great.
That, my dear, means we only have a few weeks to decide on the finishing touches. We'd better get back up to Whyalla and buy your chandelier.
Yes, we'd better.
Emily was looking forward to that milestone. They'd left the chandelier until last after deciding that the extra expense of having the electrician come back especially to put it in was a better bet than running the risk of it being hit by ladders being carted in and out. She couldn't believe how fast it was all happening. She'd watched plenty of reality TV renovation shows when contestants only had a week to do a whole room, but she'd never totally believed they didn't turn the cameras off for a few days here and there. Now she was starting to see that it could in fact be done that quickly. She was glad they had started discussing opening functions and guest lists so early after all. When Jake had first mentioned it, she had thought he was jumping the gun a bit, but now she could see he'd been spot on. We really need to nail down a logo if we're having one, or at least something to use as branding for the invitations and sign by the road. Emily replied. They had thrown around a few ideas and had decided to try using a photo of her actual button jar instead of having a logo designed. Jake had done some experimental shots, and while Emily thought some were great, she wasn't entirely happy. Did it look too kitsch to include the object? Would people think she was selling buttons? Maybe it would be better to just have the name of the business in a decorative style. Jake had some contacts in graphic design, so she put him in charge of coming up with some concrete ideas. There didn't seem to be any rush. He had said they would be able to turn such a small job around in a week or so.
Right, Jake said. Here's my guest list.
Emily had already put together a list of her own, which consisted of a few close friends and people in the district she knew reasonably well. She was also going to put an open invitation advertisement in the Wattle Creek Chronicle, so as not to have anyone feel left out. They were keen to have the building full. People could spill out onto the verandas if necessary.
Right, so the first column is good friends and family and close business associates. Must invites. The second is people I know and like, but who I don't know quite so well or aren't in touch with as much. We can cull from the second list if necessary. That's why I've included occupations. We can be a bit strategic.
Looking at the list, Emily thought the problem would not be culling the invitees, but people not wanting to travel. Other than a few people in Whyalla, everyone on Jake's guest list lived in Melbourne or in another state. But she certainly wasn't going to be negative. Jake was smart. If he'd put them on the list, then he'd done so with some confidence they'd be interested in attending. Listed were journalists, other gallery owners, business people, some people in finance, some in insurance, and a couple who ran a travel agency. Isn't it a bit weird to invite other gallery owners? Aren't they the opposition?
While there's a certain amount of rivalry, I think they're generally reasonably supportive and careful not to step on each other's toes. I've had people recommend other galleries showing artists they think I might like when I've been in browsing. And by making contacts with different gallery owners, you'll be in a better place to source good artists for the future. It's just an idea. None of them might want to travel this far.
It was at this moment Emily began to feel a little overwhelmed. She was just a youngish woman opening a building to sell some art and a mix of other things she hadn't fully decided on yet. Simone was to be her first exhibiting artist, but beyond her, she hadn't considered where to look for others, or if she even would. That was the beauty of calling it the Button Jar. It wasn't locked into being an art gallery. But Jake was right. She had to start thinking ahead. It could take ages to secure an artist. For all she knew, good ones might be booked out years in advance. It was all coming together rather too fast. Soon it would be really happening. And if she didn't want to make a hash of her first foray into business and prove her mother right, then she'd better get her act together. When Jake began talking about public relations consultants, he must have seen the sheer bewilderment on her face.
So people know about it, he explained. You could have the best idea and run the best business in the world, but there'd be no point if nobody knows about it.
But isn't that what journalists are for? Emily said, frowning in confusion.
Yes, but how do you think they find out about what to do a story on?
Emily shrugged helplessly. She was way out of her depth.
Darling, all those little snippets of advertorial in papers plugging products and services are all deliberate. It's the work of public relations people to get the media to talk about what they're being paid to promote.
I thought public relations people were the ones who stand up at press conferences on behalf of companies to make statements or say they have no comment or whatever, she said.
That's still PR, but a slightly different sort than what we're looking for here.
Right. Well, I'll just leave all this to you then, okay?
Jake reached for her hand. You can't leave all of it to me. You'll need to be able to talk about what you'll be stocking at the Button Jar, where the name came from, Simone's style, and all that sort of thing. During any interviews, you'll need to sell the place and the concept, entice people to drop by.
I'm going to be interviewed?
Hopefully. We'll need publicity if this is going to succeed. And no offence, Em, but I don't think just the Wattle Creek Chronicle will cut it.
Emily liked his drive and determination and belief in their success, but it was all getting rather serious. She had no intention of creating an empire.
All she wanted was a little shop to keep her occupied and make enough money so she could remain viable without relying too much on the farm or her savings. "Are you okay?" Jake suddenly asked, looking at her with concern in his eyes. Emily rubbed her head. "Just a little overwhelmed and a bit queasy still."
"As for being overwhelmed, you have me to hold your hand. I've been through this before. It's not exactly the same as launching an architectural building firm in Melbourne, but I'm sure some of the principles are the same."
"Thank goodness I've got you," Emily said wearily, and leaned over and kissed him.
"Well, you do,"
he said, dragging her into a tight hug.
"And if you're still not feeling well in the morning, you should see a doctor. We've got a big few months ahead. We need you in peak condition."
They were still snuggling in each other's arms at midnight when the phone rang. Emily's heart instantly began to race, as it always did when anyone phoned late in the night or very early in the morning. In her experience, it usually only meant bad news.
"Who could it be at this hour?"
Jake said, voicing her thoughts. He sat up and picked up the handset.
"Hello, Jake speaking,"
he said, looking at Emily.
"No, that's okay, we weren't actually asleep."
For Emily, only being able to hear half the conversation was frustrating, and the wait excruciating. Who was it on the other end of the phone?
"What's happened?"
Jake asked, sitting up straighter. Emily watched the blood slowly drain from his face.
"Oh, no. Is she okay? Are you okay? What about the baby?"
Now she sat up and brought her hands to her mouth. She stared at Jake, who had his eyes locked on her.
"Okay, I can do that. You just call if there's anything else we can do. Anything at all."
He reached for Emily's hand and squeezed.
"Well, you hang in there. You just have to trust the doctors to do their work. We'll handle things here. You're not to worry about a thing."
He listened again.
"No worries. All the best, and send our love to Barbara. Call again when you know more." "Right. See you."
This is the end of CD6. The book continues on CD7.